Hi, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Welcome to the Diagnostic Testing Conference. I'm delighted to welcome you all today. I am delighted to host this on Biomedical Science Day 2020. And we conducted this really on the back of the fact we were due to be over in Ireland today, hosting it in Cork, and we unfortunately can't be there for obvious reasons. And we wanted to sort of engage with our past attendees and audience to understand the role of diagnostic and testing in the capacity of disease and infection prevention, not just specifically COVID-19. And obviously there's been much made of testing in the news and headlines over the last few months. However, testing and diagnostics have been going for a long time pre-COVID-19, whether it's point of care or molecular. Diagnostics have played a vital role in healthcare decision making for a long time, and today was really to understand the role of diagnostics in the overall overarching healthcare at both primary and secondary care, and to explore some of the technologies that are available, but also to explore some of the ways in which diagnostics have been utilized in care pathway. So today we're going to reflect on a number of things. We're going to look at the way that diagnostics will work in care pathways, but we're also going to look at the way that diagnostics will be showcased and harnessed going forward as a country, a UK health system at secondary and community care. Whilst also reflecting on some of the challenges around evaluation and regulatory, and including on evaluation, we will touch on the Testing Methods 2020, which is a new platform developed during the COVID-19 pandemic to support PID evaluation, but also explore different technologies that are available for different scenarios and challenges. And it's been really successful and welcomed by many. So we've got a big agenda with lots of things to go over and lots of fantastic speakers. And I'm delighted to say that we are joined this morning by Lord Bethell, and Lord Bethell has been a pivotal part of the testing ramping up over the last few months, and a really great advocate for testing and diagnostics and supporting those that work across laboratory and pathology. So I'm delighted to welcome Lord Bethell to deliver this keynote address to our audience this morning. Over to you, Jim. Jim, if you'd like to, I think it's happy for you to jump in. Whilst we just get organised, the day will include a number of speakers. You mentioned in the introduction we're going to have a presentation today from Randox, Quidel, Roche, Febridex, but also case studies and best practice examples along the day from those working at the front line, along with the associations such as I8, BMS, BIVDA, and the BIA. So, Jim, are you available now? He's having difficulties, I think. I don't think Jim can hear us at the moment. Jim, are you unmuted? I'll just see if I can get over there to you. Yeah, you are unmuted. Can you hear us? I think we can hear you, Jim. Can you hear us, Jim? Doesn't seem like we can get this work. We will just take a look at this. Jim, hear us? Apologies for this. Organize this. Well, what we'll do in the meantime, while we're trying to organise that, is we'll go over to Doris-Ann. We'll go to, let's just have a look. Sorry about this, everybody. Just a slight technical issue. These things seem to happen at the worst possible time. So we will get on Jim, but we will go instead. Jim, can you hear us? No, you can't hear us. Okay. Right. We will go over to Alan. Alan, if you would like to present your presentation on behalf of the IBMS, and we will sort out Lord Bethel's connection ASAP. Thank you very much. Over to you, Alan.
Thank you. I'm sure we'll get over these technical difficulties. This is my first webinar, so do the participation at this level, so do excuse me. Can you see my presentation?
Yeah, indeed, yeah.
Sorry, can you see my presentation? Show my screen. Right. Okay.
You share your screen.
Right, I'll just fire on
then.
Can
see that, Jim. I can see that on.
Okay, good. I'll fire on. Right, okay. So thank you for the invitation to speak at this webinar. Excuse my slightly front screen, but I thought I couldn't pass by mentioning up that this obviously is biomedical science day, and in health across the world at this time, and recognising those that are working hard to deliver this testing in this challenging time. So why me for this presentation? The obvious answer, I suppose, is I'm president of the Institute of Biomedical Science at this challenging time. It's been a little bit of a baptism of fire on a variety of fronts, and I've grasped quite a few issues, particularly around the media interest around about COVID testing. And that's really, I suspect, why I have a certain profile on this now through my media contributions. However, I'm maybe not the most obvious person, is that I do not have a background in microbiology or virology. Particularly, my background is cellular pathology, in particular cervical cytology and screening. And my only kind of dipping of the toe into microbiology, virology is that I have been heavily involved over the last 5 years plus in the introduction of HPV primary screening into this cervical screening program. But I do admit I'm a relative novice to microbiology. So why do we test for COVID? I suppose the obvious first answer is to identify the presence of the virus. That may seem very self-evident, but I think it's worth stating. And it's to confirm the presence of the virus in symptomatic patients. That's this most obvious first aim, and that's sort of the priority for the NHS laboratories in particular. to identify in those patients that present who are acutely ill. We also can use it to look for the presence of virus in asymptomatic people and individuals, and that becomes more a challenge. I'll come on to mention why that's a challenge later in the presentation. We do it as part of a public health surveillance program, and that is still ongoing. That started early on during this pandemic, and it's still progressing. And more recently, as part of, we did this in a couple of phases, but as part of a test, trace, and isolate or protect and test strategy that's a bit variable across the UK, but in essence, that's what we're largely trying to do with this test now. The overall aim is to identify those patients that need treatment, or actually identify those who do not need, and to triage patients, particularly in that acute phase and in the acute hospitals. But overall is to reduce the transmission of this disease as part of a wider political strategy. However, more controversially, if I'm being slightly controversial at this stage, I think we all test, and we have tested in this pandemic targets that sometimes are not the same as the clinical targets, and we also are responding to media pressure to test. Again, maybe in the face of conflicting clinical aims and clinical targets. And I think the other one we do occasionally is, again, and it's linked to those previous 2 points, is we test to show we care. I think it's vitally important in this, and my next slide will show this, that when we test where there's a clinical need and make sure there's a clinical outcome from that that's going to bring some benefit. So why should we test for COVID? Irrespective of the test, we should only test if there's a clinical benefit. And testing must be appropriate for the phase of the pandemic. We had come in for a lot of criticism about the abandoning the trace strategy at the beginning of this, or close to the beginning of this pandemic. Abandoning that was, by that stage, basically transmission was so high that test and trace really wasn't appropriate for that phase of the pandemic, and abandoning at that stage was probably the correct decision. But I think we also have to identify the target population and link that to the clinical benefit. It's not anything we do has to have an aim. What are we going to do with that test result? And I think during this pandemic, we have done a significant amount of testing without clarity about what the clinical benefit is going to be. And not all tests are appropriate when you're considering testing an asymptomatic population. And with my screening background, this to me smacks a little bit of using this as some kind of screening or primary screening or targeted screening program. And this test, I think, is not terribly good to use as a screening tool, and I'll come on further in my presentation. But whatever the test chosen, it must be appropriate to disease and must be verified and suitably validated as being an appropriate test.
Colin, can we just jump in here? I think we've got Lord Bethel back. Jim, I think you're back with us. I think there's a difficulty. We're going to just I know you've got to go off at 10:30. You've got a lot of stuff on, so we're just going to come back into Jim and then come back out to Alan. And then Alan can continue the presentation. Jim, I'll hand it over to you now. I'm sure you can hear us. Sorry, everyone, for the technical difficulties before. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and Alan. Thank you very much. Fantastic. I was learning a lot there, and I can see your presentation. I'm sorry to miss it. But we have today a really big day when we're going to be a lot of data test and trace program. I'm really frustrated. A long way, and I just want to say a few words about that. And and let me, if I can answer any questions. Well, my keynote ideas. I mean, it's an exaggeration to say that this is one of the most public health crises in Britain for a very long time. And Alan, you alluded to that quite. Here in Parliament, the weight of responsibility on that. Weddings are ruined, holidays shelved, and so on and so forth. But as we've led our nation through this difficult circumstance, the work of the diagnostics industry has been absolutely and pivotal to our response. And as Adam was describing, allows us to see some microscopic area that we were. It's lives every day. It's contain outputs to people the treatment that they need. It's adding to our stock of scientific knowledge so we can fight the virus more effectively. To say a little bit about where next diagnostics industry as we move on to the next phase. But before I was just taking a step back and reflecting on what's been achieved during the last 5 months. We went with a diagnostic industry that had an enormous scientific specialism, but was not huge in scale and not just population scale testing. We lacked base that could supply us with the materials we needed for mass testing, like swabs and reagents. And that presented big logistical challenges for us. Whilst we have of help of supposedly well-beating antibody tests, many of those simply didn't stand up to clinical scrutiny. And I am very proud of the fact that Britain has pushed back against some of those tests. We knew that we had to rapidly scale up to take a small industry and to make it a global champion. So at the start of April, the Health Secretary set an audacious goal of taking around a day in March to 100,000 tests a day by the end of April. It was a bloody tough journey, I've got to tell you. It seemed that almost every day we were phoning up the SAS or Amazon or some major character to try and get us out of some hole in the ground. Things went wrong almost every day, but I am enormously proud and enormously grateful to the industry for the fact that we got there in the end. It was a whole nation effort. Scientists, civil servants, soldiers and clinicians, businesses of all kinds working together in one of the biggest mobilizations in peacetime. When we come together, one team with a common goal. Underneath the big headline figure are a number of notable achievements. We set up 38 NHS and PHE testing networks across the UK, and more are being built all the time. 54 regional and 24 satellite testing sites, and 116 mobile testing units. So for those who couldn't drive to a testing site, we would come to you. We created new mega labs to process the results, setting up the Lighthouse labs in a matter of weeks. We signed a landmark deal for 10 million high-quality serology tests for Roche and launched 4 major population studies. The sample size of 4,000, delivering incredibly incisive results. And last month we set a goal capacity of 200,000 tests a day, and all this means we have more than enough tests for anyone who needs one. And I want to take this opportunity to say a major thank you for all the companies, universities, and individuals who answered our call and stood up to help. Whether that was GSK and AstraZeneca setting up new labs, Thermo Fisher for supplying new kits, Oxford Nanopore for rapid sequencing technology, or many of the smaller British companies in the British supply chain who have supported those efforts. The fact is we could not have done it without you. Those achievements have allowed us to launch the next phase of the programme, NHS Test and Trace. Test and Trace is about hunting down and isolating the virus so it's unable to reproduce. It means we can move from an indiscriminate national lockdown to a system based on targeted local action, on tackling local flare-ups where they occur. It's the key that unlocks the lockdown. Ramping up and refining Test and Trace is our immediate priority. We need more capacity, faster turnaround times, and the full rollout of the COVID-19 app, which will be important in situations in which your contacts aren't personally known. And we will issue specific challenges for the issues we need to solve. For instance, one of the big challenges is turnaround times. We need more tests that can be processed in a clinic or in a care home, literally by the patient's bedside and by relative newcomers to the testing regime, instead of being sent off to the lab. So today I can announce that we're committing £1.3 million to a new national research programme, Condor, that will evaluate some of the most promising fast tests in the real-world care and clinical settings. The goal is clear. We want the fastest, most accurate tests available, and we want them on the NHS. But while the tests themselves are incredibly important, we're also interested in anything that will materially advance Test and Trace. So please keep engaging us on this. If you've got a great idea to improve our testing service, if you've got innovative tests with a rapid turnaround or near patient care platforms, or new antibody tests or spare capacity, then please join our national effort. We want to work with the best technology, the best data, the best minds, whether from industry or academia, home or overseas. To help make that happen, we've set up a new innovation and partnerships function. And I understand the frustration that many businesses have felt about engaging with our testing program. And I am determined to turn that around. And the innovation and partnerships function is, I believe, the system that will deliver a much stronger partnership relationship for the British testing industry. This will ensure that we follow up high risk, less mature and more speculative components whilst continually improving our service. We've set out the details of what we need on .gov.uk, where you can submit your offers and we will put in regular conference calls on specific challenges. So if you can help, I would strongly encourage you to take a look at the Testing Methods Sourcing Platform, which is a partnership between government, the Royal College of Pathologists, and some of our leading industry bodies. It's an open platform where anyone can offer ideas, and every solution or comment will be considered by a team member. So far, we've had 1,500 offers of support from the industry, resulting in 24 new swab tests approved for use, along with a whole series of promising pilots. Everything from improvements to saliva sampling, to sample pooling, to guanidine inactivation. We are rapidly progressing the best ideas, and we aim to roll out some of these later in the summer. But we need to look further ahead. This is likely to be challenging. As we move towards the flu season, we need solutions that can integrate detection of wider respiratory and gastrointestinal testing regimes. So this is a call to arms. You've got a solution that can help protect the NHS at a moment of maximum pressure, then we need to hear from you. I want to end by saying a bit about the longer term UK diagnostics industry. I have been incredibly impressed at the way in which a diverse array of institutions came together at a time when it really mattered to create a British mass testing capability that hadn't existed before. But we need this facility and this culture of collaboration to become a permanent feature of our economy, not just something hurriedly thrown together in an emergency. This will be a major strategic priority for the UK. We need to find a way of harnessing all the energy and innovation of the UK diagnostic industry to create a large-scale, resilient So please engage with us on this as well. If you've got ideas about what we're going to industry strategy, then we want your input. At a time of the learning curve is exponential. Look at history. Began with a wooden canvas and ended with the jet engine. We did the same with this crisis. Every day, the science gets better, the technology improves, our understanding incrementally advances. Thanks to the industry, we've flattened the curve to protecting NHS. The latest data shows that infections have more than halved. Any time since the start of the lockdown. Now we need the tools to finish the job. And I'm looking forward to working with you to make this happen. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Lord Bethel. Thank you. It's a very important presentation that you made there, and it just demonstrates the need for collaboration. And very exciting with the announcement. Thank you very much for your time. I'm sure all our audience will agree that we're in a moment of a step change for diagnostics, and we feel that there's so much that we can contribute towards this and supporting this moving forward. And we thank you for your time today and for your continued work around diagnostics. Thank you very much. Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye. Right. We move back to your presentation. Thank you for making way there on that, and sorry to everyone for that technical hitch before. It's sometimes one of them things you just can't control, even though you try and practice and practice. So I really appreciate Alan into allowing us to interject there for that important announcement information, and we will share the information that Lord Bethel announced there to our audience, along obviously with the recording and slides of this. But without any further ado, I want to hand back to Alan to continue his presentation. Thanks again, Alan.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. Right, that was a fascinating presentation from Lord Bethel, so I'll continue with mine. So what types of tests are available? I've made that again going back to basics. So some of this is again, but the most to detect the coronavirus itself or antibodies as part of the immune response to the infection. So the virus test detects active infection, works best during the first 7 days of symptoms. And I think that's a very important message to retain through this. And I think and often that's poorly understood when we speak to the public about testing and what testing can do. And similarly, the antibody test detects past infection and works best from around 10 days after the start of the symptoms. And again, that these messages I think are clear. We too often the public and other people latch onto this testing. We need to do testing and are ignorant, or we don't get the message clearly across as to when the best time to do this testing is. Antibody testing, and I'll come on to that in a minute, is usually made for surveys of the extent of the spread in the population, and as I go on to say, has limited clinical application at this moment, although those may emerge. Sorry, I've lost the screen. And that's the diagram kind of roughly comparing where the two different tests largely fit into the pathway of this disease. So along the bottom is days after the start of symptoms. And there's a few things worth pointing out in this diagram. I think, first of all, the kind of blind spots of the test and why the timing of this test is very important. So if you know at the beginning that actually there's a stage at the beginning of this disease where people who have the infection but could very well potentially test. They haven't yet developed symptoms, and the virus is not present in sufficient level to detect by most of these tests. So that's a potential blind spot. Another blind spot is right about the days 8 to 10, where potentially there are insufficient antibody levels to detect, and also at that stage, the virus level is also on the decline due to antibody production, and also because the virus at this stage may very well have moved down into the lower respiratory tract. So that again just visualizes the potential issues around it and the importance around about the timing of the testing and the choice of the test. So in symptomatic patients, this test is useful mainly during the active phase of the infection before the virus is cleared by the immune system. And it's mostly used for diagnosing that active infection in individuals with symptoms. And if that virus test is positive, it is almost certainly correct. So it's a very specific test, virtually all of these PCR tests. However, the test may not always detect a virus when it is present. And there's a few issues for that. It may be that we call in screening terms what we call a true false negative, i.e. the virus is present in the sample, but for some reason is not detected by the PCR technology. Another possibility, and possibly a more likely one, is that although the individual does have the infection, the sampling process was not satisfactory, was not appropriate, or did not access the virus, and therefore the virus was sampled. So the individual did the disease, the test was negative because we did not access the virus. With COVID, the test is less likely to give a positive result late in the course of the infection. I've covered that once it's been cleared by the immune system, or again, if the sample has been taken inadequately. So what about an asymptomatic population? And here we get into slightly murkier water. And I think it's clear that the PCR test is not a terribly effective test for an asymptomatic population. That's not what this test was designed to do. It's best suited for symptomatic patients, and that's linked to its relatively low sensitivity and an increased likelihood of detecting active viral infection. There is clinical value in a positive test, but a limited clinical value for a negative test in asymptomatic individuals. You can, however, compensate for that relatively low sensitivity in this by using a shorter, and again, I'm going back to putting my screening hat on again, a screening interval. In cervical screening, we talk of a screening interval in 3 or 5 years. For this test, because of the nature of this disease and the test, you would be looking for, in screening terms, a screening interval of around 4 days, which does produce considerable challenges. And especially when you're doing multiple samples from a high number of individuals, linking and tracking those frequent tests may present logistical and IT challenges. So if we are going to use this as a screening test in an asymptomatic population, I thought it would be useful to try and measure it against some criteria for screening. So there are a variety of screening, mainly Wilson's criteria are used to assess any new screening test that's going to be that is emerging to see whether it's an appropriate screening test or it's an appropriate disease to screen for. So I'm going to go through these quite quickly, but the first criteria is the condition should be an important health problem. I don't think there's any argument with where we are now is that this is an important health problem, so undoubtedly this meets that criteria. However, then we start getting into slightly shakier ground. The natural history of this condition should be understood. We clearly understand the natural history of this disease, and that's not a criticism. That simply reflects the novel nature of this virus and the fact it's only been with us now for not much over 6 months. We have a lot more to learn about this, and it'll increase our understanding, but at the moment, I don't think it's clear to see we do understand the natural history of this condition. There should be a recognisable latent or early symptomatic phase. I'm not clear in this that there is. Really, no early symptoms. Basically, by the time somebody is symptomatic, they usually have that active virus and the peak of the infection. So I don't think that necessarily holds. Should be a test that's easy to perform. Yeah, I think this test is a relatively easy test to perform and interpret. Yeah, I think probably is as well. Acceptable, yes. And then we get into, again, slightly shaky ground, accurate, reliable, sensitive, and specific. It's certainly specific, but I would argue it's not the most sensitive test for a screening test. There should be an accepted treatment for the disease. There is not as yet. Treatment should be more effective if started early. Arguably, yes, I think that's almost said that probably is true for this disease. There should be a policy on who should be treated. I think that has been moving steadily as we go through this pandemic, and I'll come back to testing strategies shortly. Diagnosis and treatment can be cost effective. We really don't have treatments for this disease yet. And case finding, and for that I suppose you could interpret that as contact tracing should be a continuous process. And yes, we are now in that phase of test and test and trace. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the serology of the antibody test. There's absolutely no doubt that testing for antibodies to this virus will provide invaluable clinical information. However, as yet, I think the jury's still out on the clinical utility of this test. It has not been proven yet. It will undoubtedly give us valuable information as we gather that data over the coming months and years. But at the moment, it's not clear what value that offers in terms of immediate clinical decision making. And I think, as I say, I think this will emerge. I think there is a role for using antibody testing for mass testing of high-risk groups such as NHS staff. That will inform strategies to reduce transmission as they move into the recovery phase within the NHS. But I think we have to be careful how we use that information, because there is a risk that individuals who test positive for antibodies to this infective agent may assume that they have somehow had immunity and are bulletproof and change their behaviours. Effectively, the presence of the antibodies does not indicate people are immune. We do not fully understand the clinical value of the presence of antibodies in an individual yet. And there's limited evidence on the longevity of the antibodies within an individual. And it's clear that individuals with antibodies can be reinfected and can transmit the virus if they're reinfected. There is a potential use use this antibody test to screen inpatients before admission as we go through into recovery and triage patients appropriately. And I think that is worthy of further investigation as to whether we screen patients and triage them based on whether they have antibodies or not. Access to test results. I think this has been one of the most difficult areas of this pandemic. Irrespective of what test we're doing, irrespective of how good that test is, we can only use that test that only has clinical utility if we can get access to the appropriate clinicians in a timely manner. And I think that's been one of the issues that we faced in this country around about the introduction of the I'll come back to that when we go into the testing strategies. I think this is a symptom, if you like, of developing labs like lighthouse labs, and then trying to retrospectively. I think that has brought us some significant challenges, and I think it's clear as we look where we are now that this is emerging one of the major challenges in testing ways. And I think as when we look back from entire testing pathway within NHS laboratories. What about the sample? It's the same logic, irrespective of how good that test is. It's only as effective as the sample test. And I'm not necessarily in favor to take a sample taken by the individual. Correctly. I think there's no coronavirus testing a sample taken by trained operators preferable to a self-taken sample. Whatever sampling modality you're using, and that must be validated against clinician-taken samples. And that includes antibody tests. Actually, I think there is some discussion around at the moment after the recent MRHA guidance around about the use of capillary testing to do antibody tests. And I think that whatever test we're doing, we prove as good as a clinician-taken sample, and I see no reason why that sample should not be used. The testing strategies. Testing should only be performed as part of a coherent national testing strategy with clear clinical utility. And this is really difficult for us due to the frequently changing approaches to testing that we've experienced within the UK, and further complicated by different approaches from the 4 nations. So we now have different approaches to testing strategies within the 4 nations. And I think if I'm being one of my political criticisms of this is that it is unfortunate the laboratory staff have been finding out about their workload and what the demands on their service is going to be by listening to daily news conferences and not being involved in this in the decision making and what the art of the possible is from a laboratory service perspective. Testing pathways should be unified and collaborative with clearly described target populations, and I don't think we've necessarily got that right either. I think my view from sitting in the NHS and as president of the Institute of Biomedical Science is that at the moment we do not necessarily have unified testing pathways, and we need to move as we move forward and plan for additional pandemics or second wave. I think we have to look at how we unify those pathways. And testing strategies should utilise the strengths of existing resources and develop plans to plug gaps in the current service. And I think one other comment I would make about the strategy here is that the NHS pathology community, or actually just the pathology community in general, whether it be NHS or in the private sector, was not engaged in this process early enough, in our opinion. So the UK pathology community has decades of experience and expertise in high quality, high volume testing in accredited labs staffed by registered staff. And this expertise should not be overlooked when developing strategies and operational planning. And I think that was particularly evident on the IT issues. I think we overlooked, and I think we underplayed the expertise that exists within particularly the NHS laboratories, but across the sector, about linking results and linking that whole sample pathway from it being taken to it being resulted. And the other frustration we have at the moment in the testing strategy is it must aim to match demand with capacity. And at the moment, that seems to be a bit of a balancing act, in that we have, at the moment, we have considerable capacity, but we do not seem to have generated the demand for testing as yet. And we await future reviews of the strategy to look what the demands on the service is going to be. So we have a few points from the Institute perspective on what we would do as a future testing strategy. And the first one, perhaps not surprisingly, is about consultation with professional bodies, other key stakeholders and the industry to articulate a strategy based on modelling for testing. And that must include all modalities of that test. And at the moment, again, I'm not clear that we're seeing that. The resources to deliver that testing exist within NHS laboratories at the moment, and the infrastructure to take the samples, transport them for testing, and report them on existing IT systems. It's not to say we have the capacity to do all the testings required. I'm not saying that within NHS laboratories, but what we have is, I think especially during phases of this pandemic, some of that capacity has not been appropriately utilised. So a model for future delivery of COVID testing should concentrate testing resources onto a limiting number of testing molecular laboratories within existing NHS pathology networks. This is the opinion of the Institute. And that should generate sufficient capacity to expand quickly in the event of a second wave of this pandemic or future pandemics. And this focus on NHS diagnostic and clinical laboratory services will maximise the capacity of the pathology community and hold in reserve a strengthened and more formal partnership arrangement with other laboratories in a model similar to the Nightingale hospitals for COVID-19 patients. It always seemed a bit of a contradiction for the Institute and to those working in the laboratories that we use a different approach when looking at how we treat patients, COVID-19 patients, and how we did testing. We designed the Nightingale hospitals and the Louisa Jordan as extensions to the NHS, whereas we designed the Lighthouse labs as a parallel stream of testing, which at the moment don't really communicate terribly well. The summary. This disease is no different from other novel infections. Every infectious disease is novel at the beginning. Same rules apply. We must develop tests that allow us to control the disease, to monitor prevalence and reduce transmission of the disease. And hopefully we'll hear more of that this afternoon. We must resist political and media pressure to test for testing's sake and to show we care. And we must focus on the entire testing pathway, not just the test. And what I think we need is a clear national, international strategy, or potentially international strategy, and how we control this infection with testing at the heart to reduce transmission and deaths from this disease. And my last slide on Biomedical Science Day, I think it would be remiss of me not to mention the scientists who are performing tests that I have just outlined. I'm incredibly proud to represent biomedical scientists in the UK and across the world who've struggled to deliver this level of testing with sometimes confused testing strategies. Their innovation and incredible commitment to the profession and the public they serve is clear to see. We must all try to learn from this pandemic and ensure the lessons learned are used to strengthen our testing resources to deal with future pandemics. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan. And I would emphasise and reiterate what the final slide you put there, Alan. Biomedical Science Day 2020 today, and I think there's some unsung heroes over the last 3 months. We've clapped every Thursday for 10 weeks for the NHS, and I think that extends to people working in pathology laboratory and testing, and to many of your members, and including those, including yourself as leaders for this. We've had a question come in, Alan, for you. It is, Please, can you expand on the reinfection patients with antibodies? Reinfection occurs why we still to triage before admission work?
We don't. Certainly, we have evidence. It's limited evidence, but we have evidence from patients that had required this injection on a second occasion after being tested. They then had another episode of this disease. So it's limited evidence, but we know this can happen from NHS staff. And what was the second part of the question?
It was if reinfection occurs when screening, while we screen patients to triage before admission work? Okay, I think only again if we have a clear repeat testing. This is not really, as I said in the presentation, this test is not really designed for screening asymptomatic people. So if we're going to start screening asymptomatic individuals, then we need to look at what that testing and that effectively that interval for testing is. I mean, for example, we are already within the NHS testing anybody over 70 who's admitted to hospital, and we're testing them on admission on day 4 and day 8. And some places are even taking this forward and testing them every 4 days to ensure that to make sure that they don't have this. So there are strategies there, but they are heavy on testing. The more because it's not just testing a person once, we have to then ramp up that testing for those individuals, and that produces effectively a multiplication factor on every individual. Okay, one other question in here from Lee Jenkins. One of the conflictions is that test developers are told to prepare for manufacture of potentially millions of tests, but there is little firm guidance. Can Alan help answer how long he expects need for testing to last and number of tests needed?
That's really difficult at the moment, and because we don't have, I think, a clear strategy, as I've said, I think we're going to be doing a significant level of testing. Certainly, I would have thought for another year, and I know that some parts of the service are planning for potentially 2 years. It's difficult to predict what that level of testing is. You would assume it would fall off as we begin to get this disease under control, and obviously, if we did get a vaccine, it would potentially decline further. But at this moment, until we actually get some clear indications of what services look like once we get into recovery, it's difficult to be clear on the numbers of tests that we're going to be doing over that period. I think, however, it is clear we're going to be doing a significant amount of testing. I would have thought for at least another year and potentially longer.
Yeah, just one question I wanted to ask you, Alan, actually. I put it to a lot of speakers today. I probably would have put it to Jim if it had the time, but we're talking a lot, obviously, about the testing related to COVID-19 and ramping up the testing as we talked about. But what's your opinion on when these tests have been developed at mass? I believe there's nearly 150 tests being developed from organisations across Europe and across the world. At the point when we've managed to utilise them in the care pathway to tackle COVID-19 virus, what's the plan, do you feel, for utilising them tests for other disease and infection where applicable? So, for instance, do you see them playing a vital role, for instance, in helping on antibiotic prescribing?
Antibody prescribing?
An antibiotic prescribing. Do you see the test playing a role in commonly used for GPs in primary care outside of COVID-19, given the flexibility of the test?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's really heartening to see the incredible development that's happening around these tests and how that test is delivered, whether it's delivered as a point of care or whether it's delivered within a laboratory. And I think one potential game changer in this was if we did actually have sufficiently accurate point of care tests, where we could actually test for that virus at the time of admission with a very quick result. We haven't got that yet, is my understanding. I know there's a lot of work into this area, but I think that would be a real game changer for this, because effectively that's what we need in the acute hospitals through recovery. If we could get a test where we could do it quickly at that point and get a result quickly, then that would allow us to triage patients accordingly. But we haven't got that yet. But I see this testing for this virus moving out into the community when those tests are arriving, and I'm sure we will get there. Is that what you meant there? I wasn't quite sure I followed your whole question.
No, that's what I meant. What I was trying to get across, or my point was, and this is obviously coming from somebody who doesn't predominantly work within the NHS or in laboratory and testing to the levels of yourselves and colleagues, but one thing for us is as we develop numerous tests and they may be hitting the sensitivity marks or not, we don't want to be in a position where we sort of push them to one side, for want of a better term, and say, well, they didn't work, we don't need them for anything. I'm sure that the adoption to support patient care pathways around viruses, influenza and other stuff, and prescribing antibiotics is there, and we shouldn't be so naive maybe in wanting to say of dismissing them if they don't fit the bill for COVID-19.
No, I mean, I think we have to be really clear. I'm well aware of the commitment and the financial investment to actually get some of these tests to market, or even to the stage where we actually start assessing them. So we need that investment to continue. So we need to encourage companies to invest in that, and therefore the only way we'll do that if we produce a clear way of some benefit at the end of that to reward them for that investment. So we would be looking to whatever tests people are putting to market, we need to be clear that what their function is, and if they're of value to that we get them, encourage them to get them to market. And NH can do that. We're happy to be involved with companies to validate tests. It's something we do fairly frequently, and we're very keen to work with companies to try and help them validate any tests that they have that will help us increase the sensitivity of the tests we have at the moment, and also the speed of the turnaround time, which is just as critical at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Alan. Your time this morning. And to all of members for their continued support in the promotion of this conference. Thank you very much again.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now we're going to hand over to Doris Ann Williams. Many of you know Doris Ann from her role leading BIVDA, and Doris played a really pivotal role on behalf of BIVDA over the last few months in relation to COVID-19, and helping really get things going from scratch. Me and is about the opportunity where diagnostics and diagnostic will be in their role, and I think we've both been astonished at the level of support and contribution that's been given, and the role that BIVDA have played in helping that and their members. So I'm going to hand over to Doris Ann, and she's going to talk a little bit more about the IVD contribution to the testing strategy. So over to you, Doris Ann. We can hear you.
Can you see my screen?
Yep, we've got the screen up. Yep, away you go.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you to Scott for inviting me to talk today. It's been a very busy couple of months, I think, with COVID. We've got a tight deadline and a lot to get through today, so I'll start straight in. Just to quick reminder of who BIVDA is, because I'm hoping that everyone attending today's webinar will be aware of BIVDA, but we're the trade association for IVD companies active in the UK market. We were established in 1992, mainly as a response to the developing regulations in Europe, so that there was a UK industry voice. And initially, a lot of our activity is around regulation, but that broadened out during the 90s and has developed into the wider range of activities that we're involved in today. We're normally based in central London, but like many office-based activities, we're now dispersed as a team around the sort of southeast, and so it's been a bit challenging to keep everything together. We've got 115 member companies, ranging from UK startups right through to UK subsidiaries of global organisations. So a really wide base, representing everything from sample collection tubes right through to genetic sequencing. So companies like Illumina. We've also got a big number of associate members who can be a range of anything from companies that are pre-revenue, so a very early startup where they haven't actually got products that they're selling, to consultants, suppliers of raw materials, any organisation really which wishes to be aligned to the IVD sector but doesn't actually trade as a manufacturer or distributor of IVD products. So our activity during COVID for the industry and around the industry has been to support members with their business continuity. So as you'll imagine, there's an awful lot of activity around what we can do and what we can't do as industry. Activity directly related to testing, so that was supporting, but also engaging with government and external bodies. So working very closely with people like Joe Martin, the president of the Royal College of Pathologists, working with the NIHR mix while they were bringing together the NIHR Condor platform, which has just been launched today, and as Lord Bethel mentioned in his opening, and supporting through other activities, and not least the Open Innovation Platform, which is being managed by Crowdicity for producing solutions for testing methods, and which Bev Matthews will be speaking about later on in the agenda. The parliamentary engagement had to continue, so there's 650 MPs and a number of peers who are very interested in COVID, what it means to their constituents, and as testing is higher on the agenda than it has ever been, and I almost hope it never is again, because you don't really want a pandemic, but it has brought a great spotlight onto both the industry and all the colleagues in the NHS pathology service that provide all the results and are so central to all the patient care. So we've been doing a lot of parliamentary engagement. We've been doing regular briefings to them. We've run a web question and answer sessions, but keeping the fuel being thrown into the parliamentary fire. And then we've been sort of forced into a lot of media outreach. The media like circling vultures. Unfortunately, their biggest interest initially was to pull the part around the 100,000 tests a day target, which was a bit of a distraction. And it's been really frustrating that they seem unable to understand the basic of diagnostics. So a lot of their messaging is distorted. So a lot of work went on by trying to get them to get the facts right, and then they could spin them whatever way they chose. Initially, I did quite a lot of outreach with radio and TV interviews, but then found that they were being twisted just to try and pull me into a corner where I might criticise the government. And while there may be criticisms that could be made, it doesn't seem very helpful in the crisis to actually start slinging mud about. So we really wanted to avoid that and work with government as constructive as possible. So I had 3 notes that went out to the MPs, webinars with the MPs and interested peers from all the major parties, and that included the chair of the parliamentary group for health. It was a great opportunity to outline what the industry is doing to support the testing programme, and I'll come on to that, explaining the different tests and progress towards the antibody testing that we've seen in recent times. So it's a really good platform to have base discussions moving forward. And that's just a slide to show that all the life science associations have been very active in the media, but of course with the focus on testing, most of the action has been on to BIVDA initially, although I think things will change as vaccines start to come on, and then drugs and repurposed drugs. The 4 main life science associations have worked very closely together throughout this process, supporting each other, and particularly grateful to colleagues at BIA. I know Steve Bates is speaking later today. We both have a lot of overlap with being industries with a lot of innovation and an interest in digital technology delivering for us. So I think it's a strong partnership, which I'm sure we'll be building on. This is just an example of the breadth of the media that got engaged, from industry sort of trade news right through to organisation like Reuters, some of the tabloids and the broadsheets as well. So it was a really broad mix of media, as well as organisations like the BBC and Newsnight and different TV programmes and radio programmes who wanted information. And then coming on to how the industry's worked, there's a really broad base of government bodies that we've had to work with, and I've just put some of them up here for you to see. So it's been challenging when you're a small organisation to run at the same speed as all of these people can. So the testing strategy, as I'm sure most of you will be aware, initially composed of 5 pillars. So Pillar 1, which was the NHS doing the PCR testing for active infection of the virus. Pillar 2, which was the other labs that were brought on, the Lighthouse labs, to support the NHS. Pillar 3, which was antibody testing, and that's both the lateral flow format, which has caused so much controversy, and also now the serology testing. Pillar 4 is on the population surveillance, so the Arnott Challenge and the Test and Track programme, and just understanding the epidemiology of the disease. And Pillar 5 I've put in brackets because it's being drawn now into the industrial strategy. So looking at creating what government think of as a sustainable IVD industry for the future, and exactly what that means, there's still a lot of shaping to be done, whether we become a testing industry as well as a provider of tests and technology. I think there's a lot of different routes that could be taken, and they need to be explored. And we're really interested to hear from companies about how they feel the shape of the industry should be moving forward. So I'd encourage them to engage with BIVDA as well. and there's certainly an active track of work doing that. The government has been providing regular webinars to industry, initially weekly, and latterly they've been every fortnight. There was one yesterday. I'm happy to provide a link to the slides and the recording of today's webinar for anyone who wasn't able to join it. It is a big opportunity for the whole industry, but it has seemed a little bit polarized. So some of the observations I'd like to take the opportunity to meet is communication. Communication with the industry has been very patchy. There's been a lot of focus on a very few multinational companies. Certainly that proved to be a bit of an Achilles heel to the government initially with PCR testing. So I'm thinking around the end of March when we were really being challenged to ramp up the technology, and I think global manufacturing hadn't reached the ability to supply enough reagents either. So the one thing I've been consistently saying is that this was a new disease. So in the same way as there's no vaccine and there's no drugs, you can't expect a test to suddenly appear overnight. The analogy I've been constantly coming to with the media is, don't start to catch up when we've only just planted the tomato plants. You know, you've got to allow these things to grow and develop. And I think my colleagues in the industry have all, regardless of their company, done an amazing job to get the tests to where they are as quickly as they did, and obviously they will be constantly improved. There's been a problem with transparency, I would say, in that I think industry would rather hear messages, even if they're not the messages they want to hear, rather than have nothing coming back to them. So the initial triage system that government set up for notifying for new tests for COVID was apparently a black hole. It was like, we've got a test, here's the information, and you're chucking it down a well without having any feedback. So I think that's been a criticism that's been taken on board. And certainly now there is, yesterday, as explained during the webinar, a much more transparent system coming through. I've been continually beating on the door that companies need feedback about where they are in the process. A lot of this, we've got to have some sympathy for the fact that you've got people working extremely long hours under a lot of pressure and doing the best they can. And certainly for the first time, I've seen civil servants who've been working under the premise of asking for forgiveness rather than asking for permission. So it's they've been taking much more risks than you would normally see in just trying to get on with the job. The expertise, and I think Alan touched on that as well, there's a wealth of expertise in the IVD industry as well as in the NHS with the biomedical scientists and pathologists. And I think those were both channels were criminally underused initially. I think a lot of expertise was expected to come out of academia and people who aren't directly related to producing or delivering diagnostics and diagnostic results. I think that was something that, you know, with hindsight, perhaps wouldn't be done. And I hope that if we ever come to this situation again, those lessons will have been well learned. But engagement, the engagement with individuals has been as good as it could be. It's been very difficult for the companies. There's nobody that's been able to take direct control. There are a lot of very key people involved, but you know, they would not have had the time to interact individually with all the companies. And I think everything's been done again as well as it could be in the circumstances, but it could have been done better if we'd had the luxury of time to plan it all out. We're definitely moving into a new phase now, and government are looking at the COVID pandemic as the first acute phase is sort of being away, and we're moving into a next phase where we can consolidate and work out strategies for moving forward. How much testing does need to be done in the future, and then looking forward to perhaps towards the end of the year when we're in a much more settled phase, where we know a bit more about what we're doing and what tests need to be done and where and when. Certainly, you'll have seen that there's a challenge for multiplexing that's come out on the Crowdicity platform, and that's an indication that, you know, COVID-19 has got to be considered as one of the seasonal respiratory diseases that we're going to have to deal with on an annual basis. So it needs to be added to respiratory panels and considered as well. There's certainly going to be a lot of testing requirements moving forward. So I think one thing that the message that I keep getting back from government is that companies shouldn't panic. Even if their tests aren't being used today, there will be enough capacity for everyone to have their tests used where they meet the specifications in the future, because again, the analogy that's being used is this is a taxi rank. There's plenty of passengers, so don't expect that just the first taxis off the rank will be the only ones used. You know, everyone will have their place. That's a quick run through of everything that's been going on. I've put contact details there. I haven't put website address, email addresses. So if anyone wants to get in touch, it's inquiry.org.uk. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doris. And we've actually had an attendee ask to join up as a membership and have directed them to site. So that's great to know. Just a couple of questions, Doris Ann. You touched on something there, which has obviously been a bone of contention amongst industry members and the wider industry on who gets preference in terms of their engagement with whether it's PHE or the Department of Health in terms of what their test can do and how it can be evaluated. Do you still feel that there is enough understanding of who you need to go to and where you need to go to for authority on this, or do you think there's a lot of too many cooks spoil the broth kind of situation where there's a lot of different organisations, different things, and it's a bit of a minefield for some of the industry to find out where to go?
I think it's more difficult for smaller companies because they have few resources to looking at the best ways to introduce tests, regardless of whether it's difficult. I should have put up a link. I'll send that to be added to the slides so they can be shared. There is a new publication that came out last Wednesday that gives some really much more clear guidance about what happens to tests and where they get notified to. And certainly the Crowdicity platform, we're doing the same thing there. I'm working on that alongside Sue Hill and Joe Martin and we look at every suggestion that comes through and it's triaged and to resources if they're market ready. They're also sent to the relevant testing advisory group to be looked at and considered. So it's a great way of getting.
So are we saying that? Sorry to jump in there. Are we saying that if you're a smaller organisation developing a test at the moment, which has been whether it's being trialled or evidence and data is being collated, that it is in their best interest to utilise the testing methods directly? Is that where we feel we should be going to, in order for that to be possibly utilised by internationally, or sorry, within the UK? Is that where we should be going, or should we be going somewhere else? That's what I was trying to get at. Where is this map? It seems like somebody tries there and we might try there, or some organisations contact me and say, well, do you know where we could try for this? And it kind of feels like, what is the clarity on that?
It's difficult, but I think if I'm going to be honest, there's really no capacity to look at very early stage products now. It's not to say that there's not interest in them, but unless they're ready to utilize immediately, they haven't, you know, there's just not been the ability to take them up. There's been a lot of support to sort of, for things that are promising, you know, and suggestions to go away and look at different aspects. But once things are coming closer to market, and hopefully tomorrow there will be an announcement about sample banks and access to convalescent sera and swabs to enable development further. So that again has been a bit of a hold up of accessing samples to do the development. But I think it's like everything, the government hasn't been able to develop a testing strategy based on promises of things that might come to market. And my own experience in instrumentation is that new platforms always take a bit longer than you expect. So if you're coming along with a suggestion of, oh, these should be ready in 6 months' time, well, it's probably more likely that it'll be longer than 6 months. And that was almost a distraction. So it's not saying that all that technology should be ignored, but it's not been relevant in the immediate sort of surroundings of the crisis.
Yeah. One quick question we've just had in before our next speaker, and is, do we have epidemiological models to guide correct investment given different government strategies?
Oh, that's an interesting one, and it's outside of my field of expertise, but I'm pretty sure that the people in Pillar 4 have got those. I know there's people working on all those models, but I'm not sure where we would find them. But I can certainly dig around and get back to the individual if they want to get in contact.
Okay, right. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's always a pleasure to hear from under some really difficult circumstances. Doris-Ann touched on in one of the slides about the media and the press, and the stories that and still happen at the field day with some that they've pointed to has been away from industry and government led, and some of them has been towards industry, and I have to agree with Doris-Ann, the way that BIVDA, BIA, IBMS have handled it and managed to get through it is fantastic. But sometimes the stuff was unnecessary, directed at certain organisations and certain associations. So I support Doris-Ann in what she's doing in BIVDA, and long may it continue. So thank you very much again, Doris-Ann, for your time, and look forward to speaking to you again in the future. Right, on to our next speaker. Now, we just talked a little bit about different tests, and this morning we've talked about the evidence around the test, how it could be used, where it needs to be used, and what can it be done. So now we're going to hear actually from a provider of this test, or of a test, should I say, who's recently had some evidence publicated only recently in terms of their triage test. So I'm delighted to welcome Mark Winrow, who's going to speak a little bit about utilising Febridex as a front door triage test during the COVID-19 pandemic, and he's going to explore about the test and some of the evidence base around it. So I'm going to hand over to you, Mark.
Hi, thanks, Scott. So the previous couple of speakers actually have set this up very well for me with their call for more rapid frontline tests that can be utilised to triage patients, get results very quickly, be used in the community, and also around some of the challenges of designing tests for pandemic situations, especially when we don't know what the pandemic is and what's coming. And that's been certainly a weakness, as Doris Ann talked about. The FARF test, the FebriDex test, it was designed to solve one simple problem. Well, it's simple in concept, but difficult in actual application. And that is knowing, do you have a bacterial or viral respiratory infection? This is a significantly unmet need clinically. You know, doctors are unable to differentiate bacterial from viral respiratory infections, and this is even more problematic in a pandemic situation, especially with you know, COVID, where you've got signs and symptoms with bacterial infections are very similar to COVID infection with pneumonia. So this, outside of a pandemic, is a global problem. According to NICE, 25% of the UK population will present in a primary care setting for an acute respiratory infection. There's a huge amount of diagnostic uncertainty around, is it viral or is it bacterial? This leads to overprescription of antibiotics in the UK. About 70% of our antibiotics are prescribed in primary care, and about 65% of them are unnecessary. And the vast majority of those prescriptions are for unnecessary viral respiratory infections. This leads to adverse events, this leads to antibiotic resistance, and a whole wealth of problems. I'm just going to bring some quotes here from a paper published in 2015 by Jonathan Van Tam. You may have seen on some of the government press conferences, but he was in 2015 calling out the specifics of the importance of having triage tools for pandemics. And, you know, to quote, severe pandemics are rare, but they cause healthcare facilities and hospitals to be overwhelmed. The difficulty in designing these tools is that you don't know what the nature of the next pandemic is. Is it bacteria? Is it virus? You don't know until the pandemic occurs, and then you have to start creating tools to actually, you know, test for that pandemic. So triage tools can aid in decisions in identifying people who are most likely to benefit from levels of care. How do you manage those people so that they get into hospital settings, etc. And it's the same now in COVID with our pandemic testing. It's placing a huge additional burden on healthcare settings. You know, as we just heard earlier, rapid, accurate tests are required to diagnose and isolate these patients appropriately. It's critical to ensure that patients with bacterial infections are not missed. And not only just that, it's critical to ensure that patients with bacterial respiratory infections aren't mistaken for patients with COVID infections. Otherwise, you are just cohorting the patients in the same group, and you're now exposing quite at-risk people to COVID infections. PCR tests, as we saw earlier, have been shown to have suboptimal performance, especially around samples, sample type. Some research out recently actually which showed many of the original primer designs actually no longer pick up some of the mutations in the virus. And we also have a significant turnaround time on these tests with delayed results. Some hospitals are saying 48 hours plus for their test results to come back. And again, really, like I said, COVID has really illustrated the critical role diagnostics can play in the control of a disease. So how does it all fit with FebriDex? Well, we are offering with FebriDex in the way forward. And how does this work? Essentially, FebriDex is a true front door triage test. It combines speed, ease of use, and accuracy, and is a really useful diagnostic tool to manage acute respiratory infections in the COVID pandemic and also beyond the COVID pandemic. It's able to rapidly diagnose viral patients or bacterial patients in 10 minutes. It's going to facilitate immediate patient isolation. It will ensure patients with bacterial infections are not missed. It will rule out non-clinically significant infection. So again, you can triage those people away from your healthcare settings who do not need to be there, and you can reduce your inappropriate antibiotic prescriptions. It's the AMR agenda. Essentially, it's going to optimize your clinic workflow and really facilitate remote or community patient testing. How we're going to do that is we're going to utilize a proprietary combination, or we utilize a proprietary combination of two biomarkers. One is MXA, one is CRP. Most of you are probably aware of CRP. It's an acute phase protein. It's non-specific marker for acute inflammation. It will elevate in the presence of bacterial infections, and that's what most people know it for, but it also is elevated in about 50% of viral infections, especially with respiratory viruses. So actually CRP by itself isn't sensitive or specific enough to determine if you have a bacterial or viral infection. And this is where the MXA comes in. MXA is a highly specific viral biomarker. The levels remain low with bacterial infection. It's elevated very quickly in the onset of a systemic response to a viral infection, and it's stimulated by type 1 interferon. It basically has a very fast induction. As your immune system starts to respond to a virus, it will come on within about 1 to 2 hours, peaks about 16 hours, and lasts 2.5 days. Well, this is essentially the star of the show for the test. The MXA is a defense mechanism against viruses. As I said, it's stimulated by interferon, alpha and beta. It's only induced by a viral presence, and that's the critical thing. It will respond to viruses. As you have a systemic immune response, you trigger the interferon, and that regulates the production of this. We combine these into a small, portable point-of-care device. It's handheld, everything's on board, needs no additional instrumentation, visually read, room temperature storage, used anywhere in the front door of an emergency department, GP. It can be used by community health workers. It can be used in nursing home settings, and we've got examples of all of these currently in use. It's going to identify a clinically significant infection, a clinically significant acute respiratory infection within 10 minutes. So it gives you a couple of pieces of information. Firstly, it's going to tell you, is it viral, is it clinically significant? And then it's going to differentiate that and say, is it viral or is it bacterial? It's going to have a 99% negative predictive value to rule out a bacterial infection. And it will also, that clinically significant is quite critical because that rules out colonization and carrier state from an active infection. Now, test itself is really simple to use. It's got an inbuilt safety lancet. You'll trigger that against the patient's finger. You'll then collect a single drop of blood into the built-in collection device. You fold that onto the device. It delivers the blood sample. You place it on a flat surface. You click the button down. That delivers the buffer solution, and the test begins to run. This takes about 10 minutes to get a result. And what you're going to have after your 10 minutes is you're going to have one of these patterns of results below. I'm going to actually start with negative result. This is a non-clinically significant infection. Whatever your patient has, it is not something that a healthcare professional needs to actually really need to pay attention to. Most likely what you've got is a localized respiratory infection. It's a typical cough or cold. You're going to not need any antibiotics, and you don't need any clinical intervention. And about 70–75% of your patients who actually present in primary care settings would have this result. In a non-COVID situation, you would be expecting about 20% of your patients to have a viral infection. And for the purpose of this test, what we really care about is the presence of the red line, which is for MXA. It doesn't matter if your CRP is elevated, because CRP elevates in about 50% of viral infections, as I said earlier. So what is critical is, have you got an elevated MXA? And if the MXA is elevated, you've got a viral infection. So what would this be? Well, it would be a systemic immune response to a presence of a viral infection. So typically what causes that would be flu, RSV, potentially adenovirus, and COVID. So in about 10–15% of your patients, you're going to get just a CRP elevated. And because we haven't got the MXA elevated, we know the CRP in a patient presenting with a respiratory infection is being elevated by the respiratory infection. And like I said, because there's no viral biomarker present, you now can be confident that the CRP is elevated by bacteria, and you can now consider antibiotics. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to prescribe antibiotics. It may depend on your patient, but now you've at least got a tangible result of, is it bacterial? Is it viral? Do I need to pay attention to it? And this would actually bring prescribing in line with the ideal prescribing for the UK, when papers have been done on what would ideal prescribing be for respiratory infections, you're looking about 15% of the time is realistically when we need to be prescribing. Consider that versus the 65% of the time we're currently prescribing on average in primary care. So how would Febridex be utilised in a pandemic situation? I've got, as Scott mentioned, we've got 2 studies which are actually just about to be published. They're at pre-publication, available on the sites now. The first one I'm going to talk to you about is a study that was in Kettering General Hospital, and this is about to be released very shortly in full journal publication, but it is available as the pre-pub. So the clinical need for this hospital was that they had a significant turnaround time of at least 48 hours to get their PCR results. Many of those patients were then coming back negative when to the clinic. It was clear they had COVID. You know, the definition of COVID is you can only have COVID if you've got a positive molecular result to the clinicians was laughable, considering you've got patients who can't breathe, they're on respirators, they've got all signs and symptoms of COVID, yet for whatever reason your molecular result is saying negative. So what they really wanted was a very fast tool to be able to cohort the patients and rule out bacterial infections and rule in COVID infections. And as COVID is a respiratory infection, and it's a viral respiratory infection that causes systemic immune response, it will elevate your MXA. So in this situation, Febridex was 100% sensitive for COVID infections, compared to 82% for the PCR test that they were using in the hospital. Importantly, Febridex also managed to identify a number of bacterial infections, and given, you know, the numbers fairly low here, but this, as I said at the start of this slide, this study was driven by an urgent clinical need. So after a short period of time, they put the study and finished the study because they created the evidence they need to actually roll it out into full clinical use. So in this short period of time, we identified 8 bacterial infections, which were just bacterial infections. The patient did not have COVID. And you need to consider that these patients were being cohorted with COVID patients because it was assumed that they had a false negative. And what Febridex did was allow these patients to be separated from the cohort of COVID patients and actually potentially saved an infection. What the study also showed was single biomarker CRP. So CRP by itself was unable to differentiate viral from bacterial infections because you have a considerable overlap in values. With COVID infections, you had ranges from anywhere from 20 of your CRP up to 300. And it was the same with the patients with bacterial infections. They had a complete range of CRP. So by itself, you just cannot use that as a biomarker. And that's where the MXA is critical. So again, what did the study show? It showed that you prevented 7 COVID negative patients being exposed to COVID positive patients. And it was able to be successfully deployed as a triage test in the hospital to manage what is a COVID patient, what is a bacterial patient, can I send these patients home, are they clinically significant or not? So that was a very, very good study. We also have a study from Southampton, NIHR, which is, again, it's currently up as a pre-pub for the Lancet. And this is the study titled Real World Diagnostic Accuracy. This study was actually, the paper came out of a separate study for a molecular test where Febridex was added onto the study as after they've created the protocol, but they very quickly realized the power of the Febridex test in this and have managed to create a publication from it. But essentially what this highlights is there is a long turnaround time for PCR tests. It causes workflow and capacity issues, delayed diagnostics, and cross-infection of your patients. It was highly accurate. So we were able to show a sensitivity of 93% in this study versus the reference method. Our specificity was slightly lower in this study, and I'm going to explain this reason why, is because they only use PCR as your clinical confirmation of COVID. It was not, they did not actually utilize what would be a clinical truth of the patient in the study. But when you read the data, you can see that there were actually a number of patients who had PCR negative results that had classic features of COVID-19, such as chest X-ray or all the other blood markers. So those patients were true COVID positive patients, just the limitations of the study didn't allow for them being called that. So again, it showed a very high negative predictive value of Febridex, allowing cohorting of non-COVID patients away from viral positive patients. And Febridex can be rapidly deployed as a front door triage tool to overcome the current issues of the PCR testing. And in fact, Southampton Hospital is now going ahead and deploying this as the front door triage tool for the emergency department. Because as your patients come in, you can very rapidly triage them to determine who is clinically significant, who is viral, who is bacterial, and manage them appropriately. This is essentially the pathway that was proposed for these settings. Is as your patient comes in with a acute respiratory infection, you will triage them with the Febridex test. In 10 minutes, you're going to know exactly what I've just said. Are they negative? Are they viral? Are they bacterial? If they're negative, because this is a host immune response test, it doesn't rule out the presence of a virus being there. It just means that the virus is not clinically significant. So you still could be a carrier of COVID or flu. It's just not clinically significant. And in those instances, if they're a high-risk patient, you may wish to either do a molecular as a follow-up, or you may just wish to self-isolate them, or however you choose to manage them. If it is viral, you can manage them accordingly, whether they're a high-risk or low-risk patient. If it's bacterial, you can consider antibiotics accordingly. So, just to recap from Febridex in the pandemic, how is it useful? It combines speed, ease of use, effectively used as a front door triage tool, manage symptomatic patients, whether you were within the COVID pandemic or without. To circle back to what some of the early presenters said, it doesn't matter with Febridex if we're in the COVID pandemic, a flu pandemic, or the next pandemic that comes up. We're not having to redesign a test or create new primers for molecular. It's simply testing, are you having a significant response to a viral or bacterial acute respiratory infection? So the test is agnostic, and it's going to be utilizable whether we're in this pandemic or a future pandemic. You're going to be able to rapidly diagnose your viral patients. You're going to be able to facilitate immediate patient isolation, ensure patients with bacterial are not, rule out those non-clinically significant infections, which really do take up a significant portion of time in healthcare settings. Significantly reduce antibiotic prescriptions. So a great example of this is in a trial at a UK GP setting. The GP was able to reduce his inappropriate that's significant. If you consider our AMR targets and what we're looking to achieve and what we have achieved, it's fairly minimal compared to what you can actually achieve by prescribing in line with ideal prescribing levels. And yeah, you're able to optimize your clinic workflow and facilitate remote patient testing. So in a GP setting, you can divert all these patients to healthcare assistants, practitioners, or whoever you want to use, alternative clinicians other than an expensive GP resource. You can be diverting your patients away to free up capacity in clinics and emergency departments. So that's essentially the Febridex test, and it is available now. It's being utilised in a number of healthcare settings currently, in primary care, in emergency department settings, in the Kettering General Hospital. It's also being used in, like I said, some primary care settings, some walk-in settings, and some community settings as well. You can utilise this in a care home. Considering the problems we've had in care homes in the UK, this test utilised in a care home could have made a very different outcome to the situation we are currently facing. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Mark. And just to let everybody know that in our handouts that you can see, we have got the study in there in one of the handouts that you can access. So please feel free to download that. And we will obviously point you to the studies. Mark, if you just drop them over on the chat to me, some of the links, and I can push them out to all our audience, if you could.
Yes, certainly.
Fantastic presentation, and one that really just embraces the fact that there is a lot of significantly accurate and great testing available, which ultimately COVID-19 or COVID-19 related demonstrates the opportunity we've got as healthcare at primary care level, secondary care level to really support disease and infection prevention, and also, and I've touched on it a bit earlier, the antibiotic prescribing. For a long time before COVID-19, a lot of the diagnostic issue was about antibiotic prescribing, which again is a huge global issue, a massive healthcare crisis. It's not in front of our eyes at the moment like COVID-19, but it's slowly building up. And if we don't take advantage of some of the opportunities, as Lord O'Neill pointed out in his 2016 review, diagnostics being one of them, we're going to face a huge health challenge, far bigger than COVID-19, far bigger. So fantastic presentation, Mark, and thank you again for your time and support on this conference and event today.
Certainly, no problem.
Thank you, Mark. Right, we are obviously behind a little bit on time due to earlier technical difficulties, but we will push on. We did have a 10-minute refreshments, but I think you'll all agree, getting up and making yourself a cup of coffee while nobody can see you, it's fine. I don't think we all need to stop and head over to the buffet because there isn't one. So get on with our next presentation, and building on what Mark's just said, we're going to go into looking at an actual case study now, demonstrated by Hertfordshire Community NHS Trust, which is going to look at what they utilise PLCT equipment in response to COVID-19 through Simon Ward. Simon's got 10 to 15 minutes to just go over it and share these details, and I think it's a really great presentation, having seen the slides myself. So I'm going to pass over to you, Simon, and I'll let you get on with it.
Hi, thank you, Matthew. Matthew, can you see my screen all right?
Yep, I can. It's Scott, but I can see the screen. Yep, no worries, Simon.
Thank you. No, it's just I'm working on multiple screens here. So can you see my main presentation screen, or can you see my screen with all my notes on it?
We can see your main presentation screen.
Okay, fantastic. And thank you for inviting me to come and give this talk today. A little bit about myself first, to just put the presentation into perspective. I'm a clinical engineer working at the moment in Hertfordshire Community NHS Trust, but I have somehow amassed 25 years in this field, working from district general hospitals to university teaching hospitals, and now here in community. And I think in some ways there's a similarity between my career pathway and other life science pathways, in that we're kind of behind the scenes, but if we didn't do what we was doing, none of the COVID work would really be taking place. And in some way that sets the tone of my presentation. I'm coming at this from a engineer's perspective of deploying equipment in healthcare settings and making sure that it's fit for purpose, does what they need it to do, and we can keep it doing that, i.e. maintaining it. So, oh, sorry, just slight technical difficulty. Give me a second. I will. Well, I do apologise, everyone. If you just bear with me, for some reason, Outlook has decided to do something else. Let me try this. There we go, do apologise for that. Right, a little bit of a background, and one of the things I'll emphasise this isn't a presentation about what we've been doing to detect and screen for COVID-19, although we are doing that within our trust. This is more a presentation about how we responded to COVID-19 and in particular how we use point of care testing in our response. So we're a community NHS trust. We cover all of Hertfordshire, which for those that don't know is in the west of East Anglia here in England. We provide children and adult services, both general services and also specialist services. Before COVID-19 came along, we had limited adoption of point of care testing equipment. We've got lots of glucometers that we use, and we might use alco test meters and urine analyzers, but on the whole, that was as much as we were doing for point of care testing equipment. Now, we had been looking before COVID-19 to do some prevention of admission work, both from the response to the NHS long-term plan, but also as an internal response to the trust. We do like to look forwards as to how we can keep continuing to improve our services, both clinically and technically. So what we effectively did, and I think in many ways, as quite a bit of the NHS did, we turned on a sixpence back in late February, early March. And one of the things we decided to do was to adopt or develop 2 sites to do point of care testing work as part of this pilot. And the reason we did that, primarily, our goal was for prevention of unnecessary admissions. So as the hospitals were preparing, as the acute side was preparing, we at the same time was doing what we could to prevent unnecessary admissions going into the acute sector. And that really was, well, at the start of this, that was our primary goal. We knew that we would get improved information for the clinicians, and we expected to get faster treatment for our patients rather than waiting 24, 48 hours for a result. And we knew that if we had that information, it would be preventing unnecessary treatment to the patients. But the last 2 points that I've added on there, I think, and this whole project is still a moving feast, but one of the things that we realised quite early on was that in the testing that we could do in the community was giving patients, or would give patients, greater reassurance that they were receiving the right treatment. Because, as there is still now, there's a great deal of concern out there for people regarding COVID-19. And if we have some ability of showing that, well, actually, we don't think that this is a COVID-19 related problem, and we've done this test and we're going to treat you according to this, then we did find that did give assurance. And then we probably thought, or we did think that we would be able to develop additional pathways, but all of these things really came on after the fact that we wanted to prevent admissions. So these are the tests that we chose, that our clinicians chose. I'm not going to tell this audience what little I know about these tests, though I've been on a very steep learning curve. So we chose CRP because of the infection marker that it gives us. And we chose D-dimer as part of our DVT pathway. And then also we added UNEs into it as well for that general assessment of an unwell patient that the clinicians wanted. And those were the 3 that we initially started the project with. What we found was that the instant, and when I say the instant, I mean within 5 minutes of giving a clinician, giving our district nurse matrons a CRP test, the very first words out of their mouth was, well, now I need a white blood cell count because I need that to support this work here. So we straight away, we added that into the mix of the test that we wanted to perform. And again, coming from an engineering perspective, or coming from a managing technology and healthcare environment, the equipment selection for me was one of the primary issues that we needed to address. And we initially thought that we wanted portable equipment. We envisaged an army of district nurses travelling the county with this equipment, performing tests in the patient's house. And we quickly dropped that as the model that we decided to go with, because we found that actually we would have limited coverage if we kept this equipment with particular nursing staff. And what we decided to do was to base the equipment at the 2 locations we'd already chosen, or the teams that we was going to roll this out from, and that we would then use that so staff could take blood samples with the patient and then either come back themselves, or we set up a series of blood runners who would would collect the samples, bring them back, test them and get the results out there straight away. Now, purchase cost was important and running costs, but ease of use was paramount, and reliability. And then with that would be the customer support that we knew that we would need. We don't have a life science pathology team or that support within our trust. And we were aware that we would need to be able to do robust external quality assurance as well. So this is the equipment that we purchased. We purchased, the first item we purchased was the Fine Care Analyzer, and we identified this because it gave us 2 on our hit list, both the CRP and D-dimer tests. The technology that it uses is a robust technology inside, and so this is so we purchased this. And as soon as we purchased the equipment, we realised that a large part of what we needed to do with the project would be the appropriate training of the staff. We use this for 2 tests, CRP, D-dimer, but actually both tests use a different technique for preparation of the sample, mixing with the buffer solution. And in particular, we didn't have staff that were familiar with using a 2-stage pipette, so that was a key part of the rollout of this equipment. But staff adopted it very, very quickly. Instantly, staff were seeing how that this was going to benefit the work that they were doing. And then one of the things throughout all of this was what we realised as we went and are still going on this journey was that the POCAT equipment that we're putting in was going to give us, almost for free, different functionality that we will be able to use on different pathways down the line. And so I've just shown this slide here, the different tests we can use with our Fine Care Analyzer. And there's a number of the tests on there that staff are saying, actually, can we have this one? Can we have that one? And that's part of the ongoing work. The second item that we chose was the Abbott iStat Alinity. It met all of our criteria for the testing and the reliability and the ease of use. So when we rolled this out to the staff, again, staff were, with all of the equipment, initially they were reserved, but once we showed them this working, it was almost seeing their eyes light up, because certainly with UNEs, which is a very popular test within the community, getting that value back quickly was going to be a great benefit to them. And again, because we had that machine, we had additional tests that we could use. Now, one of the things that became evident here was that actually we had trained staff within the trust that had experience with the Alinity in our respiratory nurses. And so we do now use, or we use the blood gases within the trust. But they were a great help in getting us used to using this equipment and deploying it and training the staff as well. And then the third item that we chose, as I mentioned very early on, we were asked for white blood cell counts. And so initially we was looking at a standard white blood cell count machine, but as we looked into it, we realised that we were able to get a differentiated white blood cell count, and that was going to give us the ability to have greater clinical information and offer additional pathways with the equipment. So what are our findings so far? Because we're still in the learning phase, I think. Certainly this project hasn't come to conclusion yet. And I think one of the first things that became evident was after we'd selected the equipment was that staff training was going to be paramount in our response in deploying this equipment. Not only because we have 2 services we were rolling this out to that were offering a 24-hour service, and so we needed to have sufficient trained staff to cover as 24 hours on both of these sites, but also because in reality each of the tests that we had chosen required a different technique, either of sample collection or sample preparation. As I mentioned before, we had no staff that had used a 2-stage pipette, and getting familiar with that, I'm robustly familiar with it, because it's very easy for people to say, yes, I'm happy now, and go off, but we needed to really have that competence assessment in place, which we did put in. But once we'd done that training on all of the equipment, very quickly we got a lot of confidence in from the staff, and in particular that was driven by us running parallel tests with the laboratory and demonstrating that our results were matching what we was expecting, and so very quickly we had staff confidence, and very quickly we had support from the staff, because we were, if I give an example of a matron who has decades of experience working within the community sector, to be able to give them the results from, or for them to determine themselves the U&E values or CRP values effectively in an instant. All of these tests take a few minutes to prepare and run. It was great to see them engage with the project, and even better it was when you then spoke with them a few days later and they're telling you about how a particular patient had presented, say, on the DVT pathway, and the clinical presentation of the patient meant that actually they didn't think that it was a DVT patient, but when they used the machine they identified that it was. And to see that we're, very quickly we put something in place that had given us that ability to make better clinical decisions as well as quicker clinical decisions. That was very rewarding for the project. Now, I put next that we prevented admissions, and we are preventing admissions, and this was the primary goal of the project. But I think what we've learned is that actually some, or if not the greater value of rolling out this equipment within the community is that we're getting better patient outcomes, and that isn't just stopping people going into the hospital, but that's getting them onto antibiotics quicker, or not getting them on antibiotics, or starting DVT, or again, not starting DVT treatment as a precautionary measure whilst we wait for the results, but actually just not starting that patient on DVT treatment if it wasn't necessary. So I think part of the learning for us has very much been about that this actually adds a great amount of value to all of the work that we're doing, not just preventing the admissions into the acute sector. So what next? We knew we needed to do external quality assurance, and we're just really getting that in place now. We're into our second month, and we did. Our priority at the start of this exercise was getting the equipment out and getting it in use. But we're very conscious. We take governance very very seriously within this trust, and so we're just now rolling out the EQA for each of the tests that we have in place. And it almost started straight away. The additional pathways that this equipment has given to us, or has given us the ability to look at, just started from right from the beginning. So we said that we wanted to prevent admissions. We identified the DVT pathway, but we're now putting in place intravenous antibiotics in the community. That's the pathway we're working on at the moment, as well as giving fluids in the community. So we don't need patients to go into hospital if our U&E values show that they're dehydrated. We're now able to offer that fluid in the community, preventing that admission. And also a diuretic pathway is we're exploring at the moment. There was another one. We're really at the outward bounds of my clinical knowledge here, but neutropenia in patients having chemotherapy, we've identified that using the differentiated white blood cell count allows us to determine whether or not they need to go in to the acute for treatment, or whether and miss out the emergency department, or whether they can stay at home. Because we're very familiar with the fine care analyzer, we're now looking, as we're looking at additional tests and equipment, we're now looking at the fine care plus analyzer, as this has the COVID-19 antibody test. So that's another part of what we're looking to implement, along with, because in many ways this has opened our eyes into the ability of using a greater amount of point of care testing equipment to just support all of the clinical work that we're doing within the community. And obviously, as this is proving, although we're waiting for the final assessment of the project, already we're looking at the expansion of this across our trust to see what other areas we can use it, and what other specialist services can tap into. For example, our diabetes specialist nurses, now we can offer them additional tests other than the standard glucometer, looking at how patients are responding to their diabetes. That brings me to the end. I hope that wasn't too long.
Thank you very much, Simon. I really appreciate it. It was a fantastic presentation. We're going to have a question that I'm going to send you on the chat, just privately. There's a question coming from someone. So if you go to your chat box, I'll send that on in a second, directly to you, and you can answer that and come back. I can support that. But thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining us. We are going to move on to our next speaker, which is Dr. Simon Parker, Clinical Market Manager at Roche Diagnostic. And Simon's going to talk about the ELISIS anti-SARS-CoV-2 serology test that we've heard a bit about, and just a little bit more about that. Simon, whenever you're ready, I'll hand over to you.
So can you hear me okay?
You can hear you, Simon, yeah. Go for it.
And how's the screen? Let's just check the screen come in.
The screen is, there you go, it's fine.
Perfect.
It's showing everything, slides and stuff, yeah.
These remote conferences are always a little bit disconcerting when you're never quite sure if you're talking to anybody or yourself. Yes, it's working well. Okay, if you have any big banging, just apologies for that. I'll put the filters in up in the loft, and they've been warned to be quiet for the next 15 minutes. So hoping they'll have a sit down and a cup of tea, and let me get on with it. Okay, so
yeah, just to let you know on there, just to sort your mic's a little bit muffled, but I'm sure you can just adjust that. And we are seeing slides in your talking notes if you didn't want that to be up there. But
all right, okay, hang on.
If you want to just do that, I'll change
adjust that. Hang on a second.
I know your microphone's a lot better there, Simon. Yeah.
Yeah, is it okay? All right, let's get the notes. Yeah, not my notes anyway. There we go.
you go.
Okay.
That's great.
All right. Okay. Let's crack on then. So I'm sure looking at the auspicious speakers that already have conversation over the impact of coronavirus in the UK and Ireland, of course, and we've probably also had quite a lot of conversations around which tests are used for what use case and the role of testing in COVID-19 and obviously how industries responded to the requirements that we've had. So just to go over quickly the coronavirus, this is the very latest figures actually from this morning. Of course, it's fairly evident that there's been some little blips in coronavirus associated deaths the last few days and a little rise in cases. But as you look on the right hand side, you can see clearly a number of lab confirmed cases in England in particular is yes, gradually going down. We're hitting the bottom of the curve. And the number of UK deaths are actually bottoming out now. So, you know, it looks like we're slowly coming to the end of this this part of this curve in this part of the epidemic. And let's hope that the testing that we're doing and the new ways of working and new ways of socially keeping ourselves to ourselves is actually helping with this. So I'm attempting now to move on. I'm hoping I can get the next slide up. Excuse me. There we go. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the testing and a little bit about I'm just going to touch on the molecular testing actually, and I'm going to talk about the antibody testing as well. And what is really important to understand with SARS-CoV-2 is that, of course, there are other coronaviruses around. We have seasonal and we have the pandemic coronavirus. And we know that the SARS-CoV-2 came from, originated in China, and the work that's been carried out to design both the molecular and the serology assays is based around the differentiation between SARS-CoV-2 and the other coronaviruses. And we feel this is really important in where we go going forward, and in terms of getting some really good differentiation of the testing. So what are the main symptoms? I think we've already covered this already, I suspect. High temperature, new continuous cough, and loss of change of smell. This is all on NHS Online, so we'll skip that slide. Okay, but what is really important and what is really hit hard on this pandemic is the risk factors for severe disease and health, and how it's becoming really, really important at older age, with male or female comorbidities, obesity, and people who smoke have really had it a lot worse than other people. And it's really important that we, in order to maintain, to understand this epidemic, we understand people who are being infected and how we can deal with them in terms of intensive care units to minimise the impact on the NHS. So this is really the main slide, really, where we come to look at the how we come about the diagnostic side of testing. Obviously, once we become infected, there will be a viremia, usually present within a nasopharyngeal secretions. This will gradually decline over a matter of days as we start to build an immune response. And once that immune response rises, in most cases, in most infections, we know that we have some kind of immunity or some kind of ability to prevent the prevention of reinfection. But at this stage, of course, we don't know with COVID-19. But suffice to say here, if we look at this graph, we can see how where we have the impact of our PCR testing in trying to define acute illness, and the impact of our antibody tests in trying to define the antibody profile as a result of our immune response. And this is really fundamental to our understanding of this virus and how we prevent transmission, how we go forward in trying to come back to some kind of normality. So what are we really trying to find out with our diagnostic test specific for SARS-CoV-2, where we're trying to find out if someone's currently infected with SARS-CoV-2, whether someone has previously been infected with SARS-CoV-2. And if we take take this down a little bit in more detail, we can look at the value of the nucleic acid testing in terms of being able to inform an individual of their infectious status. They can anticipate their illness and take actions to prevent transmission to other people.
We can inform patient management and actions needed to prevent transmission, and inform actions needed to prevent transmission indeed with other people and public health situation. From an antibody side, we can look at the detection of susceptible individuals and those previously infected. To differentiate the two, of course, has big ramifications in terms of people who can return to work, and if we do ever get some really good evidence that we have protective immunity to this virus, then we have some kind of understanding of safe practices as well within those more slightly risky healthcare settings. So, of course, identifying intervals with neutralizing antibodies is absolutely paramount. We hope that the antibody assays on market will eventually be proven to have some good correlation with neutralizing antibodies, albeit they may not actually be able to define that within their package inserts in their use cases, for example. And of course, in terms of antibody detection, it's going to help facilitate contact tracing and improve our public health awareness of surveillance. So quickly on the Roche's COBAS SARS-CoV-2 assay, the nucleic acid test for SARS-CoV-2, available on our high throughput instruments. This is the 6800 and the 8800. Very quickly, it's an assay, it's a qualitative detection of nucleic acid from SARS-CoV-2. It uses nasopharyngeal and oropharyngeal swab samples from patients to meet the correct criteria, and indication, of course, of the use cases, presence of RNA and clinical correlation with patient history, of course, is very important. In terms of the actual assay itself, it's a dual target assay and detects SARS-CoV-2 specifically, and also pan-coronavirus as well. And it uses two different targets, one in ORF1AB, open region frame 1, and one in the E region. And of course, they apply to these high throughput instruments, which are fairly well scattered across the UK and Ireland, and they're providing high throughput testing, 96 results in 3 hours, going up and up depending on how many systems you have in place. So then to the antibody assay, of course, and here we have the a pack of the anti-SARS-CoV-2 assay that goes on to the Alexis platforms, that is the 411, 601, 602, and 801. This assay was produced in a remarkable amount of time, 44 days actually from the first starts into the design to actually having this assay available for distribution to our customers. So we started on the basis of 4 antigen designs based on nucleocapsid, membrane, envelope, and spike. 46 different configurations. In the end, we settled on nucleocapsid on the basis of the best specificity and sensitivity with the clinical samples we had available to us. Nucleocapsid also as different from spike protein, which we're already aware of. There is clinical evidence and papers and studies that suggest that both nucleocapsid and spike are both very important in the neutralization of antigen. And it is hoped that some studies that we are now doing, and we're also working with Public Health England to better understand the correlation with neutralizing antibody, and then whether that antibody lasts over time, how long it lasts, and whether it will prevent reinfection. So just to touch basically on the anti-SARS-CoV-2 assay in principle, 2 9-minute incubations give an 18-minute overall assay, the classic Roche double antigen sandwich assay using the Alexis system for chemiluminescence detection. So here we can see the two green diamond shapes actually are the antigen sites binding together around the antibody complex. One side will be the ruthenium side, which is the chemiluminescence part, and one side is actually the microparticle side, which does the addition to the side of magnetic inside the magnetic vessel. So you can hold the particle in place and the wash steps can go there. So another 9-minute step, and then the light measurement is produced. So a very quick 18-minute assay in our high throughput instruments. And this is actually what's in the pack inserts at the moment, by the 214 samples from patients with PCR confirmed infection. This has actually been doubled in numbers now, so we actually have twice as many samples already going to go into our version 2 pack insert. We'll see with the speed of the production of the assay, we weren't able to do as much work on stability and as well onboard stability and shelf life, if you like, due to the constraints with the CE marking. But certainly, if you see from the clinical point of view, we can see that very high numbers of patient samples we were able to include in the CE marking study, and we can say that within after 14 days post PCR confirmation, we're getting up to nearly 100% sensitivity with this assay, which is part of the pack insert, of course, where we're looking for defining whether someone has had experience of this virus before, rather than looking for acute detection. So in terms of specificity, over 5,000 samples used from the routine and blood donor clinics, also including a common cold panel and a coronavirus panel. And this is going back to one of my very first slides, where we talked about differentiating between seasonal coronavirus and pandemic coronavirus, to ensure that when we badge someone as antibody positive, we're not badging them with antibody positive to the seasonal coronavirus as opposed to SARS-CoV-2. So these actually numbers are now up into the tens of thousands and will be included in the second pack insert as well. And specificity remains over 99.8% specificity, but with very tight confidence intervals based on the number of samples, the huge number of samples tested. And as you may have heard as well, of course, we've been involved with Public Health England, and in particular Porton Down, in terms of having our assay evaluated, as has been our molecular assay as well. And there are several other evaluations ongoing to further add to the information we already have, and maybe to clear up a few questions that have been in the press around specificity and sensitivity of all manufacturers, of all the manufacturers of the high automated, high throughput assays. So what are we actually doing with these assays? These assays will, of course, I think this has probably already come up already. We're looking at the government's 5 pillars of testing. So we have pillar 1, which is really pillar 1 and 2, the PCR testing, pillar 3, the antibody testing, we're leaving 4 and 5 for the surveillance and the understanding of the virus and the how the virus is continuing to transmit and through which different cohorts within the UK. Okay, so absolutely massive fast look through the assays that we have on offer. Just to say, this is what is actually defining the antibody tests at the moment as being used within NHS and care staff, and then their families and the people that clinicians request. And I think we'll start to see this rolling out to more bigger numbers quite soon to help understand the spread of this virus across our communities. And of course, the assays provide just 2 parts to our ever-expanding portfolio across our serology and our molecular for infectious across congenital down to some of our newer assays in vector-borne disease. And of course, all these assays are smaller instruments building up to our larger high throughput instruments and our full connected solutions going into very huge laboratories around the world. So I hope that was not too fast for you. So I'm aware that building work is happening above my head, so I don't apologize for that. But yeah, so that's it for me.
Thank you very much, Simon, and thank you for that. And as you said, when you're in these situations in your home, we're living in a completely different world, aren't we? I mean, you've spoken for us at many conferences and events over the years, and even getting up on stage and everything seems to be difficult. But dealing with builders and kids and cats and dogs, it's a crazy time. So I really appreciate your time. I've just sent over a question that's directed to you. If you look at your chat box or question box, you should see. You want to have a look at that and come back to the person who's asked it. Given we push for time, we're just going to push on to our thank you very much again. Any you want to say, we'll post it up as a link resource as well. Right, next speaker, we have Holger Gundelach, who's Senior Marketing Manager for Europe at Quidel. and he's going to talk a little bit about what Quidel are doing to support antigen testing and testing in general, and we're delighted to have him. So we're going to hand over to Holger to start his presentation.
Hi, Scott. Thank you very much for the introduction. I hope you can hear me. And my second question would be again, which kind of screen of mine are you now seeing? The real one or my the screen, the other one?
We are seeing much at the moment, but Matthew, I think, might be able to do just that. We're just seeing a Diagnostic Testing Conference. Have you been control and accepted? There we go. Now we're seeing your main slide. You're away.
Yeah. Okay, that's good.
Go for
it.
So
thanks a lot for your invitation and also the chance you give me to present Quidel and our diagnostic solutions in this really special situation. This morning, Lord Bethnal said there's kind of a call to arms for diagnostic solutions, and I tried to use the next couple of minutes to give you a short look into our arsenal. So in the end, it will, in this time frame, only give me the chance to scratch the surface, but I just want to start a discussion with all of you and get back to us, to me and my colleagues, and we can dive deeper afterwards. So I guess it might be good for me to start with a question in a quite simple way. Who is Quidel? Because it might be, in contrast to other sponsors that you heard, that our name is not familiar to everyone in the room. We are a leading diagnostic company with a clear focus on point-of-care tests, already founded in 1979, headquarters in San Diego in the United States, and in the moment around 1,500 employees worldwide that are developing, manufacturing, or selling diagnostic solutions across a real broad spectrum of markets and disease areas. So, now it might be the question, despite 40 years of existence, why is the name Quidel not familiar to everyone? It might be linked to the fact that before the acquisition of the Triage portfolio about 2-3 years ago from Alea, or more precisely Abbott, we have been outside the US only active through distribution and less with a direct approach to the market. That has changed now quite a bit, and we are really offering a wide spectrum of diagnostic solutions, mainly around pillars of molecular diagnostics and point-of-care testing immunoassays. And in this area, of course, for us, the current situation, especially as we had always a track record of introducing new targets to our platforms in a quite quick way, it was for us a real situation where our team started working tirelessly to create new diagnostic solutions, really to add to this arsenal of arms for COVID diagnostics. And as you have heard earlier in several of the talks, there are different modes of action for tests. So on the one hand, the more direct pathogen detection with molecular tests or antigen tests, and you have heard earlier in the previous talk a bit more about antibody testing on the serological side. With Quidel, we have started development in all the 3 areas and were among the first companies who received in the US also emergency use authorizations for our molecular tests, which are the Lyra and Lyra Direct SARS-CoV-2 assays. What I want to focus a little bit more on today, because it's another topic that hasn't been discussed too much yet about, is our antigen test, our Sophia SARS-CoV-2 antigen test on our point-of-care platform. And on the same platform, we are also currently in development for a antibody test. I guess it's clear that molecular diagnostics are and will remain the cornerstone of the diagnostics in this pandemic situation. But as time is limited, I will not focus too much on it because it's quite clear. We have RT-PCR kits which are developed as an open platform solution, so they can be adapted on a multitude of different PCR cyclers in a 96-well format. If I can highlight just one thing, it would be our direct assay, which allows the use of the assay without any prior extraction steps. That might be interesting, especially with regards to the somehow or sometimes limited supply situation that we have seen regarding extraction equipment and consumables. So this is one of our tests readily available. But as I said, I want to go more today into the antigen detection. Our Sophia platform is quite well known and very well used point of care platform. So we heard this morning that mass testing is really a logistical challenge, and we have to provide enough testing to avoid further lockdown situations. And one of the ways is getting more to test at the bedside, and make test results readily available. And point of care testing could be one of the ways to go there. Sophia is a real point of care platform that makes it easy to implement near patient, has a fast turnaround time in just around 15 minutes, but also offers you some kind of batching possibility. So it's not just that you can have to put in the cartridge and directly read it out, but you can prepare several ones and read them out in a kind of batch mode. There's one thing which I would say shows a big advantage of instrument-read rapid tests, which is the possibility for connectivity and surveillance. We spoke this morning about the chance to, or about the hurdle or challenge that exists with having the right IT systems up and getting information really shared across multiple stakeholders. And here, I guess, an instrumented connectable platform is a good way to go. Which leaves one of the points on the slides, which is the one that leads to most discussions, which is assay performance. Generally, our antigen test performs extremely well with specific detection of beta coronaviruses or SARS-CoV-2 and SARS-CoV without any cross-reactivity to seasonal coronaviruses. This is what we heard also before. This is an important factor that is to be answered. And what I want to put up as a question is this a valid option for rule-out testing? Given the fact that generally antigen assays are looked at more critically due to a reduced sensitivity versus PCR methods, which is typical for the difference between the two methodologies. But if we look to it on an epidemiological scale and with a good and really extremely good immunoassay, the Sophia SARS antigen FIA is, it is, in my opinion, a good, valid option for testing. And let's test sensitivity in then read good, far above 99%. So if you put that into relation with typical you name it, that easy of test results might turn the scale in favor of not an answer this give me or really so the rest and say that Quidel is also pushing for the to write this. There's also the question testing beyond initial COVID-19 diagnosis. So it's a little bit going into the story that Simon Ward earlier mentioned. So there are other risk factors, other diseases coming up, or other biomarkers which have to be tested. And especially when you look at a recent publication, there is really accumulating clinical data that suggests prominent, especially cardiovascular dysfunction in severe COVID-19 patients. Yeah, this is coming right from an IFCC task force paper that was recently published. And what you can see is that especially in this cardiac coagulation field, you have strongly increasing biomarkers and and multi-panel setup. What focused on push immunological, where you can push immunoassays to. And this is our Quidel point of care platform with test results in less than 20 minutes from whole blood samples. What are you able to achieve with such a test? And we had a very recent publication on the diagnostic accuracy of our test, which showed this test is at least comparable from its diagnostic accuracy to that of the best validated central lab assays, being the Abbott Architect or the Roche Alexis tests. Based on this, we were also able to derive and validate a highly efficient and safe 1-hour algorithm. And so you see, also on the cardiovascular side, we have an immunoassay which can help to cater for all these patients in the current situation. Okay, that was a fast walkthrough through parts of our arsenal. And as I said, this is more likely to be a teaser, so let us get into discussions, either with me or with my colleagues from Ireland, with Eric and Owen, whose contact details you see here, and can also ask for it later on. And please also visit our web presences, Quidel.com and triagetrue.ie.
Yes, I've just shared them, Holger. I shared them to the whole audience through your website and stuff. If you send over the studies on email to me today, in fact, if you can get something over to me in the next 5 or 10 minutes, I'll get them out to the audience as well.
Yeah,
directly
I can do so.
The studies. Fantastic test. It just goes to show the amount of amazing technology we've got across this country and the world. I remember at the time, I know we've got organisations based in Europe and America, but I remember at the time the initial quote, I think, did it come from Matt Hancock when he says, well, we never had a UK testing field or a diagnostic thing. I remember myself and Doris Hann in horror when he said that, but it's going to prove today that we have a fantastic set of organisations with a great opportunity for healthcare. So we're going to move on to Matthew. I'm delighted to have and talking about which a little bit you heard Leffel, a bit you heard Doris Hann talk about, and a little bit you talked that Alan Wilson talked about. We're going to look at testing 2020, and Bev's going to tell us how that works, how that supports validation, and how you as companies can utilize it and get behind it. So over to you, Bev.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation to here. I think, you know, this wasn't on my work to-do list to attend this conference when I set my New Year's resolutions in December for January. So, so thank you. And just a sign of the times of where we are. But we are super excited to have been able to bring an improvement methodology to support the testing methods programme.
And I'm going to, over the next few minutes, just give you quite a canter through of some of the things that we've done, some of the approaches that we've taken, and then ways that you can get involved and engaged in the work too. So crowdsourcing is something we do a lot in improvement. I'm a nurse by background, but I've spent the last 15 years of my career working nationally, looking at large-scale change and how we transform programs and systems using different methods and approaches. And crowdsourcing is something that we've used largely for behavioural change, so looking at how we transform perceptions of nursing and midwifery to encourage people to come into the profession. But we decided as a group that this was a really good way of actually looking at the testing methods programme. It's a way of bringing together ideas, solutions, content by getting contributions from as many people as possible, no matter how big their organisation or company or their experience, but bringing the ideas in, and it balances that small group of experts who always seem to be around the table versus an innovation funnel where we bring wisdom and experience of many, and we were really clear when we set the programme up that we were looking not at polished finished solutions. They were probably all largely in the pipeline somewhere, but actually ideas that needed partners or needed a little bit of something to make theirs 100%, so we could try and match things up together. So this is from another programme we did around ambulance services called Project A, but it just shows how we start with a large group of ideas, interactions, engagements, and it's called, in my world, that's called divergent thinking. So you're really open, really encouraging, communicating, and bringing everybody to the table, and then you move towards more convergent thinking of narrowing it down to things that actually can make a difference, and things that you want to take forward or progress. And it doesn't mean that all of the other ideas are not right or not good. It just means they don't fit that current challenge, but may be helpful elsewhere or at another time. So when we were invited to be involved in this work, it was really to focus on Pillar 5 around the diagnostic national effort. And at that time, it was around trying to get to the 100,000 tests by the end of April. So that was our kind of call to action to set the programme up. And we set up, a number of things in quite quick succession. So to set up a crowdsourcing approach, usually takes a good couple of weeks, if not months, 6 weeks. But we managed within about 24 hours to actually get the platform designed, up and running, the convening route together, and the experts who would review the ideas and solutions that came through. And we went through a process of, setting up and designing the challenges, reviewing the challenges and categorizing them, which is an ongoing approach, sorting out what was ready to deploy. So this wasn't about us approving any or mandating them in any way. It was about us saying, look, these need to be the system, and we had a bulletin that went out to, or still goes out to, the NHS pathology labs, and we've also now set out, those of you who are on the platform, we've also set out a separate space where everything goes into, which is a catalogue of resources that fits that ready to deploy mindset, so anybody can have a look at where we've got to with them. And then obviously we want to look at the impact, uptake, spread and learning, so we can share it, whether that's across the testing programme or whether it's beyond, and looking across COVID-19 in its entirety. So those of you who've not been on the platform, and I can see a couple of names that I recognise, so I know some of you have, but some of you may not have. You know, we have different challenges for different ideas, and one of our key tasks when we first start is being really clear on what the ask is, because you can imagine, you know, if we put a massively open question, you know, we'll never be able to manage all of the ideas that come through. So the key bit of managing that diversity is making sure the question for the challenge is absolutely clear and close. We obviously will get some that don't fit that, and it's an open platform so people can post that, but they then will be filtered out through the assessment process. And there are a number of categories that we've identified. So A for us means it doesn't fit this current challenge. So that doesn't mean it's never going to be helpful or never useful, but it doesn't fit the challenge that we're currently looking at this moment. B is we want to keep an eye on it because it may have potential, but it's got certain things that are not completed, whether that's around validation, CE mark, etc. But it's probably just a little way off at the moment for the, you know, kind of the timing of the deployment. C is one that's got potential but needs some extra support, some partnering, needs a closer look at it than the time that our champions have to do their assessment. So we take that aside and do a little bit more investigation into that one. D means it's ready to go, it can be deployed. And as I said, it goes into our catalogue of resources and into the bulletin for sharing. And E means it doesn't contribute to where our challenges are for this part of the work, but may actually be helpful for another pillar. So we categorise that as an E, that it needs a connection with somebody else because it may help to solve what they're trying to solve. These are the challenges that we have now closed on the platform. So the original submissions, the original 4, low blood volume, increasing end efficiency and alternatives to swabs have also just recently closed. So those are the ones that you know, are no longer active on our platform. That doesn't mean we're not doing anything. You know, as I said, if they fit into the B, C or D category, then work is still carrying on, you know, to make that happen. But at the moment, we're not taking any more new solutions into those groups, and the catalogue of resources is there. And we also, over to the right of this slide, you'll be able to see the statistics that we can pull from the catalogue, from the platform, which is what we look at with the champions in our convening group every week. And this shows how many people we've got registered. So at the moment, this was pulled off this morning, there were 287 registered users. So we know we're going to hit 1,000 registered users, which is probably one of the biggest platforms we've been involved in. You know, certainly I work with Helen Bevan, who leads on internationally on improvement as well as within the NHS, and that's her experience around crowdsourcing too. So that's massive, considering it is a very niche area for improvement. So the 2 new challenges, these are the current challenges that are open on the platform. One is around multiplexing. So as you can see, we're starting to think, as many of you are, about you know, what happens when flu season comes, when you know, we do a more new normal environment. So we have a challenge out at the moment around multiplexing, and we've had 7 brilliant ideas put forward which have all been referred on to the team. And we've just yesterday launched our challenge around being environmentally friendly with some of the impact of testing processes. So looking at what are the ideas, the solutions that can help with that. And that's a brand new challenge, which we really love your help with getting the message out there, bringing the solutions forward, and helping us to see what we can do as a collective group. So these are the back-end statistics from the platform, and again, these I took off this morning, and it shows if you add all these numbers up at the bottom, you know, that's, you know, a massive number of engagements on the platform, and it counts how many people have commented, how many ideas, how many people have voted, the page views, and how many people have joined us. As you can see from when I did the original stats in the previous slide to this one, it's already gone up a couple of people. The other thing that we support as well is an NHS engagement webinar, which we've just moved to fortnightly to monthly. So we had been running it fortnightly during the intense piece of the work. We're now moving it monthly to build up a more sustainable long-term rhythm to it, where we bring in invited speakers, but also look collectively at some key topic that needs to be discussed. So how are we going to drive this improvement forward? What's our shared purpose around the group? What are some of the ideas that the Path Labs have taken forward, or are there any barriers or problems to implementing them that we can help find solutions to? So we support this and have it as a group plenary session, but also breakout rooms, so there's smaller conversations for people to meet together. I just wanted just to take a couple of seconds. So at the same time, and you know, they saw what was happening with the testing methods crowdsourcing platform. We also then started up the clinical challenge platform, which is looking at starting to pull off some of the what's happening where, how are things working, what do we want to keep post-COVID. So you know, as a result of the work you've been supporting around testing methods, you know, others are seeing crowdsourcing as a really good way of making sure we learn from COVID collectively as a big group, and take things forward. And these are some of the areas. So again, you can see it's been modelled on the testing methods platform as to how it's set up. And then just finally from me, just a few themes around crowdsourcing. So the key thing is to match the method to the aim. We do lots of work around virtual collaborate and setting up virtual sessions and conferences. And we're really clear about working with our partners to work out what is it they're trying to solve before we decide what's the best platform. And that's exactly the process we went through with testing methods, was to understand what is the issue, what is the problem, and then identify the solution. So crowdsourcing isn't the answer for everything, but it could be the answer for many things. And then the key thing is to get going really quickly. You know, the key thing with crowdsourcing is about energy, is about putting enthusiasm into it, is about moving quickly so we can get going. And we also, with this, obviously had a timing imperative to find the solution. We again, just generically linking the challenges with real and pressing problems. You know, people don't have a lot of time and capacity to waste, so it's got to be relevant, it's got to be real, and it's got to add value. Our champions are absolutely crucial and key, and they're senior leaders across the system within the Royal College of Pathology, the BIA, BIVDA, the NHS and the Department of Health testing programme. And their role is absolutely key, and they are you know, ambassadors and champions of the programme. And when you're setting up crowdsourcing, it's really important to have those people in place at the beginning rather than a bolt-on afterwards. So we bring to crowdsourcing an active community management approach. So that's just, you know, as much about the back end of the platform as it is about the front end. So we use Twitter a lot to promote things. We push through LinkedIn so that we get as broad a group as people engaged and having an opportunity, and co-creating it with the people who use the system. You know, so it's not designed in a laboratory and then put out, and that's an improvement laboratory in my language, and then put out as you know, here, try and make this work. It really needs to fit in with where people are working and how they're moving forward. And we also try and learn from what's needed, rather than just pulling the data and thinking we're onto a good thing, you know, let's keep going. We try and understand whether it's actually working or whether we need to tweak things. So I said earlier about the key thing is about getting the challenge absolutely crystal clear and right, but that doesn't mean you can't change it as you go on, and as it emerges what solutions or opportunities come forward. Staying connected with the bigger picture, again, you know, it kind of builds that bridge between what needs to happen and how the changes can happen. So, you know, we're asking people to share their ideas that they have been working on, potentially in isolation or on their own, and we're asking them to put them onto an open platform. So one of there has to be a, you know, a benefit to that, and that is, you know, how they can connect to the bigger picture. We talked a lot at the beginning of any crowdsourcing piece of work about whether it's an open or a closed platform. So do you close it and have it invitation only, or do you have it open? And, you know, this is the 4th platform I've been involved in, and we've never closed any of them because, you know, our experience is the crowd manages itself, you know, and we don't have you know, many people put in anything that's unhelpful or disrespectful, you know, or doesn't contribute. So we, you know, profess that an open platform is a much better platform. And the rhythm and the cycle of the crowdsourcing platform is absolutely key. So we never leave a platform without a challenge on it. We always make sure before we close one challenge and make that decision, we have another challenge either open or ready to go. But we also don't burden with challenges. You know, at the moment, I don't think anybody could cope with all of the challenges being open. So we're very clear about when to close them when we think we've got, you know, as much as can come through or as much as can be managed. And we always follow up. You know, it may take a little while because some of the ideas and challenges that have been put forward are not simple, straightforward, or yes/no answers. They're complex, and we want to try and encourage every idea to have a home to go to or a solution that we can find. So it may take a little bit longer with the testing methods program, but we always try and ensure we follow up in a timely way, or if somebody comes back to us saying they'd want an update, then we'll respond to that. But it's absolutely key to do that. And that's my quick canter through crowdsourcing for testing methods 2020. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bev, and an interesting presentation. We can, we want all our audience, and if you're not already on there, obviously if it's applicable to jump on and join testing methods and take advantage of it. It's a fantastic system that's been done at rapid scale, as Bev says, and the potential is huge. It's not there to take over from anything in particular, but it's there to offer the system which can support open platform, as Bev touched on. So thank you very much, Bev, for your presentation and your our next presenter now, with product specialist at Randox. Randox have been playing a pivotal part in the COVID-19 testing and what they've achieved. And I would be delighted to
Can you hear me now?
Ben, come on.
Can you hear me?
I can
okay?
hear you.
Perfect. Can you see my screen okay, or what can you see?
We can, Ben. We can see your screen perfectly fine.
Presentation there, okay.
We can see the presentation there. Yeah, you can move it up into bigger, but we can still see that as a presentation.
Fantastic. So first of all, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Ben Crawford. I'm one of the molecular product specialists from Randox Laboratories. I'd like to thank you for giving us the time to sort of talk today. I'm going to take a little bit of time to discuss Randox's important involvement in the COVID-19 testing response in line with the British government. And then I'll take a little bit of time as well, and I'll talk a little bit about some of our products that have been created in response to some of the needs of our customers and the needs for diagnostics for COVID-19 at the moment in the pandemic setting. So if you don't know Randox, I'll briefly touch on who we are. So basically, Dr. Fitzgerald, our current owner. Basically, we're quite a large company, 1,400 employees at the moment, 400 of which are scientists and engineers who tirelessly work on our new products and instruments and assays. We sell into 145 countries around the world. At the moment, we are third in the world for quality control and calibrators for in vitro diagnostics. Our customer base is mainly hospitals, clinics, private laboratories, veterinary institutions, research laboratories, big pharma, academia. We always strive to respond to the market as and when issues within healthcare arise, and we're continually developing new tests and analyzers to meet those needs. We invest heavily in R&D, and sort of this comes into sort of fruition with how we've responded with the COVID-19 pandemic. We acted very quickly to create new tests, new controls to meet the needs of our customers and to ultimately help with the pandemic. About 4% of all diagnostic tests in the world are manufactured by Randox, which sort of shows you the scale to which we're operating. So at the moment, we're based out of the Randox Science Park, which is our headquarters in Northern Ireland. It's where most of our manufacturing takes place, where most of our research and development takes place, but it's also where our clinical laboratory services are, which is where a lot of our SARS-CoV-2 testing has taken place over the last few months. So at the outset of the pandemic, Randox worked very closely with the British government to essentially put together a plan for COVID-19 testing at our science park. So Randox has invested 30 million and created 200 jobs for a specialised COVID-19 testing laboratory in Northern Ireland. This included the rapid creation of new facilities, new buildings, new analysers and new tests for SARS-CoV-2. Currently, we are conducting COVID testing as part of the national response to diagnostic requirements for SARS-CoV-2. We developed the new laboratory extremely quickly in a massive Herculean effort. Over the course of about 4 weeks, we built new buildings, we created new stock of analyzers and generated new biochip arrays to help increase the throughput of our laboratory and reach high testing numbers. At the moment, we conduct about 16% of the total UK molecular SARS-CoV-2 testing at the Randox in the testing. So this includes scientists as well as engineers who are basically creating new analyzers that will hopefully significantly increase our capacity for SARS-CoV-2 testing. So I'm going to go on and talk a little bit about our product lines that are related to SARS-CoV-2. These mainly take the place of our controls, our quality control standards and external quality assurance schemes, our molecular assays and the analyzers which go along with those assays. So I'll launch in now to the controls to start. Basically, from the outset of the pandemic, we saw that there was an increased need for quality control for molecular methods for SARS-CoV-2. Manufacturers all over the world very quickly created new assays for the detection of the causative organism, but there wasn't much in the way to assure that these assays were performing as manufacturers were stating. So we have two different brands which we provide quality control under. The first is QCMD, which is an external quality assurance provider, and the second is Diagnostics, which is really internal third-party control standards. So we responded with the release of an external quality assurance pilot scheme for SARS-CoV-2, which is now the largest EQA scheme in the world for SARS-CoV-2 for molecular methods, and we have now successfully launched third-party internal control standards and linearity series for quality assurance within and between runs of molecular assays for the pathogen. Our controls are fully traceable, whole pathogen. This replicate a patient sample very closely. This enables laboratories to basically comply with international quality standards to ensure that assays and results are consistent across the globe. So QCMD first, which is the EQA provider. We're a fully accredited external quality assurance provider for specifically molecular microbiology. We're the world's largest, as I stated. Basically, we provide schemes all over the world into over 100 countries with over 10,000 participants, a number which has steadily increased recently, with over 90 programs for all sorts of testing areas, from respiratory medicine to gastro, bloodborne viruses, transplant-associated infections, and so on. We provide our schemes to clinical laboratories, reference laboratories, blood banks, and we also provide some custom EQA schemes to international organizations and national schemes as well. As I said, at the start of the pandemic, we worked very quickly to obtain sample material, to create control standards, to create essentially a pilot EQA scheme. The uptake for it was incredible, very massive uptake. We have laboratories all over the world taking part in the scheme at the moment. It has recently finished just there. Basically, participants, once they return their results to us, would receive a real-time rapid report, which allows them to make immediate corrective action on any issues that they might be experiencing with their assays. At the moment, there's over 750 subscriptions for the pilot. Labs participating are from all over the world. The majority of major national public health bodies, including Public Health England, are participating in the scheme, and participants are using major commercial assays and also some more niche in-house methods as well. I'm happy today to announce that we've released two new EQA schemes for SARS-CoV-2, one which is focused specifically on SARS-CoV-2 detection, which is a follow-on from the pilot. This will enable ongoing external quality assurance for molecular SARS-CoV-2 assays. The second scheme we've released is in line to basically aid with syndromic assays, such as multiplexes, which target more than just SARS-CoV-2. So we're now able to sort of assist with quality assurance in both realms, both direct detection of SARS-CoV-2 and syndromic testing as well. Our second line then is Diagnostics, which is our third-party control standards. Basically, we cover all the major testing areas within infectious diseases, from respiratory infections, transplant-associated diseases, gastrointestinal, sexually transmitted infections, CNS, bloodborne viruses, and so on. Our controls are specifically designed for laboratories carrying out molecular PCR-based methods for the detection of infectious diseases, and not for serology methods at the moment, but that is something which is in the works at the moment as well. So obviously, with a lot of new assays being brought out in the market, customers and users need to be sure that their assays are working as prescribed and described by the manufacturer of the assay. So today we have several different control standards and kits that are suitable for different purposes. We have Q controls, which are essentially run controls to ensure that between runs of molecular assays, the assays are performing similarly, but there's continuity with results. But we also provide molecular Q panels and analytical Q panels, which are basically just slight variations on linearity solutions. So essentially, these kits are different concentrations of SARS-CoV-2 that a laboratory can run consecutively to ensure that at the high end of their assay, their assay is performing correctly, but also that their assay is working correctly down to the limit of detection. They can also ensure that their limit of detection is as described by the manufacturer. At the moment, our controls are being used by Public Health England, well, not all, but most NHS clinical laboratories, the Lighthouse Hub Laboratory Network, the COVID-19 Volunteer Testing Network, academic institutions, and big pharma as well. The uptake again has been quite incredible. Most laboratories across the UK are now using our controls as a standard off which to compare all assays. Our controls have been vital, basically ensuring a qualitative third party to perform as a third party process control, to ensure that reagents are batch accepted as they come into the lab, for system maintenance and troubleshooting as they arise. Obviously, with new assays, there are sometimes issues with that. As training tools for new staff. Obviously, with the COVID pandemic response, a lot of staff have been brought in from who are maybe less experienced, and it's important to let them train on materials that maybe aren't patient samples where results are maybe less importance. So our controls have served well in some sites to allow for training, and as well as that, also for verifying claims made by diagnostic manufacturers. Moving away from the controls, we'll go on to talk a little bit about our assays and our tests on which we have analyzers. Basically, we use a method of microarray technology for our PCR. So basically, our assays all work on the basis that you would extract your material, then amplify, and then move the amplified DNA or RNA onto a biochip or a microarray, upon which you can detect multiple analytes from a single sample. So our biochip array technology is highly innovative. It's been around for quite a long time. It has applications in lots of different areas, including molecular diagnostics, immunoassays, food testing, toxicology, and other clinical immunoassay areas as well. We've invested a lot of money in the development of the technology, and we've seen massive uptake with it now with our new coronavirus assays. Over 380 scientists and engineers in Northern Ireland have been involved in the development of the technology. It's extremely versatile in what it can do. As I said, it can perform both molecular assays as well as immunoassays in a very wide variety of different fields. We have a lot of different analyzers that can be placed in point of care as well as in high throughput laboratory situations, so it can fit the needs of most customers. We have over 400 new tests under development, more than any other diagnostic company at the moment in the world. Essentially, when the pandemic came around, we developed a new assay for SARS-CoV-2, which I'll go into a wee bit more information on in a moment. But it's really testament to how quickly we developed that assay. In a matter of a few weeks, we had a test that was ready to be used on patient samples, and it's really a testament to our R&D department who worked tirelessly to make that happen. So how does it work? Essentially, the biochip is a ceramic plate, a 9x9mm ceramic plate. Onto this plate, we dot in discrete regions or dots, or DTRs as we call them, oligonucleotides or single-stranded segments of DNA, or proteins for the capture of proteins. Essentially, using this, you can detect target regions within DNA or RNA, or you can detect proteins within a sample. And this enables us to multiplex or simultaneously detect multiple targets or analytes from a single patient sample. At the moment, we have different biochips available for lots of different purposes. In terms of the number of analytes you can test, at the moment we have 49 target biochips, but as well as that, we do have 100 target biochips as well. So at the advent of COVID-19, our R&D department worked immediately and rapidly to develop a new multiplex array for COVID-19. The current array is called the COVID-19 array. It is designed in line with recommendations made by the CDC and World Health Organization, who stipulate that not only should you be detecting SARS-CoV-2, but you should be detecting accessory markers to that to ensure that you are confirming the presence of SARS-CoV-2, which is exactly what our assay does. The test is for the detection of SARS-CoV-2, and it uses two different markers to do that. It uses the open reading frame 1AB segment, for the direct detection of SARS-CoV-2, and then it also detects the E gene or sarbecovirus region, which is a confirmatory marker for the presence of SARS-CoV-2. So should both of those markers light up and be present on the biochip, you would have a positive result for SARS-CoV-2. The assay has been tested and assessed by Public Health England, and it passed with exemplary results. So it jumped through all the hoops that was required, and they gave it the green tick of approval. So it's very well liked by them. The instrument which it is being used on at the moment is, I'll come on to that in a wee bit, but it's called the Evidence Investigator. Public Health England also still have our Evidence Investigator. I believe they're still using it, so we might get it back, but we're very happy that they're using it for testing at the moment. SARS-CoV-2 array. We also have our respiratory multiplex array. So I think there was some discussion there of the crowdfunding, and this is something we've had for a while now. Essentially, it's an extended respiratory screen, so it's for the detection of 22 respiratory viral and bacterial pathogens from a single patient sample. Obviously, with SARS-CoV-2 and respiratory detection, not only is it vital to detect the causative organ, to detect any science part of these world to assist with the pandemic and specific COVID-19 testing. This is really for me tied through testing. It's been still have it. As I said, we're very happy that they're continuing to use it at the moment. It's a batch test analyzer, so you can process a minimum of 3 samples and a maximum of 54 samples at any one time. So in a working day of about 24 hours, which most COVID labs are doing at the moment, you can run in the region of about 1,000 samples, which is extremely good. It's high-plex multiplex testing. It has the ability to do both our SARS-CoV-2 assay as well as the respiratory multiplex 2 array at the same time. It provides target flexibility. So as I said, the biochip, not only does it do molecular assays, but it also does protein arrays as well. We do have cytokine assays, which again are applicable within the pandemic situation where we've seen situations with cytokine storms. We provide protein arrays for cytokines, which again have had extreme uptake across the world for treatment of patients and detection of cytokines within and inflammatory responses within patients. There are minimal sample requirements for the analyzer. It's a very small sample volume for our molecular assays. It's extremely robust. We've had these machines in the market, some for 10 years with the same customers, and we very, very rarely see any issues with them. They're extremely robust, and they're built with modern laboratories in mind, so they're used to being put through very high throughput, and we very rarely see any issues. They're also fully LIMS compatible, so if these were to be placed within NHS sites, they're you're fully able to integrate this into existing LIMS systems. The future of SARS-CoV-2 testing, as we see it, is automation, and this is our solution for that. So soon to be brought out is the Randox Discovery platform. We see it as the future of SARS-CoV-2 testing and molecular testing in general. The Randox Discovery is very exciting for us, and we've obviously employed quite a lot of people at the Randox Science Park to increase manufacturing for this. It's a fully automated benchtop analyzer, which is fully enclosed, so it's all inside one housing. It utilizes ready-to-use cartridge-based reagents, so this makes it very easy to actually use the machine. All that the user would need to do is load samples on one end of the machine and load the consumables at the different stages along the machine thereafter, at which point the machine takes over and automation takes place, and the assay follows the extraction, amplification and detection process. This means that you don't need specialized molecular trained staff to actually process samples in a very high throughput setting. The machine is comprised of 3 interconnected areas, one for extraction, one for amplification PCR, and then another for detection on the biochip. So this is good for sort of reduced risk of contamination, both for the user, which is important within SARS-CoV-2, but then also to prevent false positive and false negative results. The machine also integrates UV lighting, meaning that all surfaces within the instrument are hit at some point by UV light, allowing for decontamination. The machine can process 16 patient samples in a single batch. For one batch to process through the machine, it takes in the region of about 3 hours at the moment. But you can continually load the machine from the extraction end. So once your first batch of results is ready in 3 hours, you can have results every hour thereafter on the hour of 16 samples. So it's for high multiplexing, made possible by our biochip. We have a very wide test menu and also R&D pipeline. So not only do we have the assays for respiratory testing, but we also have assays for STIs, UTIs, chronic lung infections, hospital-acquired infections, and soon in the future we will also have a sepsis assay, which will be out on the instrument. It's pseudo-random access batch testing, which means that in those 16 patient sample batches, you can order in any way which you please, an STI sample, a SARS-CoV-2 sample, a respiratory multiplex 2 sample, and so on. So it allows for real on-the-fly choice of what tests are required for the patient. And that is me. Thank you very much for listening. If you have got any questions about anything that was covered today, please feel free to drop me an email or get in touch. I'm not sure if we have time for questions, but if
we have time for questions, Ben. I've just mentioned to the audience, Steve and David have had to go into a meeting. I don't know if it's related to what Lord Bethel was talking about earlier, but some meeting that they've had to attend, so they won't be able to join us. I don't think we have any questions in, but a question I'd like to put actually would be if done at Randox.
Could you say that again?
Sorry, would there be anything that you would do differently, you would see the government in terms of working alongside them the last few months? And how do you think that going forward, the testing, whether it's COVID-19 or not, will function?
Well, I think I couldn't really comment on sort of the company opinion of how the government has responded. That wouldn't be my place to comment on that. And in terms of how I see sort of diagnostics moving forward, particularly molecular diagnostics with analyzers such as the Discovery, I can definitely see, you know, a move towards more automated testing within infectious diseases, and not only that, into point of care settings. So I think as the years move on now, I think we'll see a more centralized testing setup with hubs and spokes. But within those spokes, I think you'll see, you know, instruments that require maybe less user input, and sort of, you know, testing done near the bedside. Ultimately, I think we're in a bit of a transitionary phase where we will be moving from, you know, testing being conducted on a mass scale in lots of locations to important testing being done where it's needed.
Yeah, so near patient testing in a way.
Correct.
How we shift the point of care testing and how we do that. That's going to take obviously regional and locally led leadership in some areas. From your position and some of the work you've done, how are you supporting locally on point of care testing or testing in general from Randox, and how have you been doing that in the past?
Well, Randox, I mean, we've developed through the biochip array. I mean, we have various different instruments that are capable of being utilized in point of care settings, and that have been made available for the NHS and for, you know, hospital settings to utilize. So I mean, we do have another instrument called the Vivlytic, which does sort of, it's an automated molecular instrument as well, which can be implemented for point of care testing. In a wide variety of areas. You know, it could be used within sexual health testing, it could be used for point of care triage of patients coming into A&E for respiratory infections, which is something we're currently looking at.
Fantastic. Do you think, question I put out really to everyone really, I suppose, is, do you think there's still a lack of education around diagnostics and testing in general, not just so much under the professionals, but within the public awareness?
I mean, from my own personal standpoint, I think there is a general, I think there can be a bit of naivety from elements of the public in their understanding of how diagnostics takes place. There's often a lot more to it than what is perceived. In terms of education, I think the workforce that is in place in the UK at the moment is extremely proficient, and they've performed extremely well in the circumstances. So I don't think there's a lack of training or understanding there as such. But yes, I mean, I think there'll always be, you know, a lot of testing takes place behind closed doors, and it's not obvious to the public how it maybe takes place. Yeah.
Okay, I've got a few polls that I want to put out to the audience at the moment. We've prepared these in advance, and we've done these over the last 3 or 4 years in our diagnostics, and we've probably asked the same questions. I'm hoping we see a kind of step change now to some of these questions we've had. So I'm going to pop this up onto the screen in a second, and you can click and vote. So here we go. Quick poll. Is the current evidence and evaluation system used for diagnostics in point of care molecular fit for purpose? Now, organisers and panellists don't vote. This is up to our audience. So if you would like to vote, you can click now. And it's collecting responses at the moment. So this is just to understand, we've had a conversation, we've obviously listened to Bev to talk about the testing methods, but one thing that I've found over the years, and many industry organisations that we've talked to have found that the evaluation system can be sometimes very difficult to navigate, and in sometimes people have stressed that it can be quite unfair depending on who's evaluating and where, and it's an interesting conversation. We've read a lot this week about the MHRA's 98% sensitivity, and reaching that target. So it's very difficult to do. So I wonder whether or not, and I can open this up to our speakers if you'd like to jump into it. Do you think that evidence and evaluation and evaluation system used up until March, not taking into account what we were talking about testing methods, do you believe that they're fit for purpose in supporting the acceleration of diagnostic kits where evidence is appropriate? I just finish our poll and we can say that it is 67% say no, 33% yes. So attendees and panel, have you got any thoughts on this? I can unmute you, I can mute yourself. Have you got any thoughts on the systems? I know it's difficult for some of the organisations and companies to talk about this. Sensitivity in diagnostics is well renowned and well known, but it'd be interesting to see your opinions. Mark, Simon?
Thanks, Scott. You know, my thoughts on this. Yeah, it's Mark Winrow here. As a small company, it is very difficult to gain attention. The test of potential interest, you know, can potentially help companies, but one of the things is not all tests fit into the categories. And so, for instance, for COVID, the tests are clearly being categorized into molecular or serology, and now potentially antibody testing. If your testing doesn't fit into those neat categories, it's very easy to look with regards to COVID responses. Clearly, neither of those three topics. In general, outside of COVID, it's also very hard to get in contact with the right people or to have the right people engaged, and some of the processes are very lengthy for evaluation. So yeah, it's difficult to navigate on most company perspectives, but most smaller company perspectives.
Yeah. Okay, I think it's sort of tailed off a little bit, but I could just the microphone. I mean, let's go to something else I wanted to put out there. So let's hide this and let's go to this next poll. Now this is pre and during COVID. I want to put this question forward. So do you think the government pre and during COVID-19 have done enough to accelerate the use of diagnostics in any setting? Now this is a question I want to put because UK Diagnostics, running this conference today, have been working around diagnostics, mainly around the IVDs and point of care for 3 to 4 years, and generally majority of it has been looking at the antibiotic prescribing use of diagnostics based on the 2016 Lord O'Neill review. And to date, that use of diagnostics to determine prescribing has been very, very small. There's been a number of pilots and there's been some good evidence. There's maybe not been enough data and evidence, but it's not been at the highest. Now, many are seeing the introduction of diagnostics and testing during COVID-19 as being a step change in embracing that going forward once the virus is under control, whether that being through vaccination or herd immunity or whatever it may be. But I want to know whether or not we think we're doing enough to actually broaden the use of diagnostics at primary care, GP, community health, or whether or not we feel that there is still a lot left to be done. And if so, what do we need to see that changes to make this accelerated? Let's just close this and share it. And 100% say no. So, wow. That's still never changed. That poll there on a small set of of attendees or data compared to, we're not talking 500 or 1,000 here. There's never really ever changed off 100% really. So I want to know, what is it you would like to see from industry and for everything? And if anyone, I know there's a few people got their hands up, I'd be happy to take, but the panel, from your perspective, Doris-Ann, anyone, what would you feel needs to necessarily happen to make sure that the diagnostics are embraced where appropriate in care pathways? I don't know if Doris-Ann's here. Simon Ward, you from a Hertfordshire point of view, would you like to comment on that?
Sorry, just to mute myself there. I think certainly COVID-19 has shown us is that there is a great deal of testing that we could be doing in the community that could benefit the patients, benefit the turnaround time, benefit financially. And I don't think I'm not going to just say the government, but I don't think as an NHS or as a wider group, including the government, have done enough. And I think our eyes have been opened, and that's one of the reasons we've been doing the presentation, or we're passing the word out, is we're trying to get this message out to other community trusts.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing you mentioned there, Sam. You said it's opened your eyes to what that is, and I think that may be a barrier over the long term, is that the attention on diagnostics and testing has been minimal. I mean, it's literally been the last few months has been the highest amount of information and awareness across the broadsheets of media of diagnostics I've ever seen in my time on working on it. And some for good reasons and some for bad reasons, a lot of it topical media debate. But there seems to be a need to actually share more wider evidence on what diagnostics can do in care pathways, and obviously something that you've showcased today, and then many others we've met. We're currently working alongside Health Education England and NHS England with Angela Douglas to produce a short film about the role that diagnostics plays at point of care in GP settings, NHS and in pharmacy, and that's something we're really proud to do. But I do feel there's a lack of education there. But Simon, just quickly, and I'll put you on the spot. What would you like to see then? Is there a need to be a repository, an area that you and colleagues can go to find this information?
Well, off the top of my head, I think there's a number of things that we need to do regarding the comms around it, but there's wider things like, without wanting to get political, how the healthcare economy works. So you can perversely find yourself with a solution to a problem that doesn't benefit your trust, but benefits patients that belong to another trust or CCG or group of patients. And so I think there needs to be a higher level approach to how this would work and how it could work in the context of the wide, all of the NHS, not just, for example, in our case, we're in a silo in our own county here. But I think that a repository of information, a drive to the benefit of doing that, to come back to the trust that are doing it, because we might see a patient that this is across the NHS, I believe this could happen, but you might have a patient that you see that comes to you because they are, let's say that they having a coagulation check done. Whilst you're seeing that patient, you could be testing them for something else whilst you have them in front of you, but that something else might be a treatment that's provided by a different trust or a different NHS body. So I think there needs to be a stepping back taken as well, both from a funding and providing that information and the drive. Now I'll go back to the NHS long-term plan. I suppose it's in there, but I just don't think it's being driven down to the root level.
No, well, make a very good point. There's been many plans, hasn't there? I mean, at the very beginning of the breakout of COVID-19, I made quite a long post actually on our channel about some of the innovation reports done in 2016, 17, and 18 around diagnostics, many of them actually co-authored and written by the likes of John Bell, which said that the investment into diagnostics and testing would be immense and we would see a step change in life sciences across the UK. And it didn't appear. In fact, it hasn't appeared. It's only appeared now because it's had to in March and April. And let's be honest with you, it was the beginning of April. Most of these companies were informed that they had to help out. So it's not something that has been planned out. It's something to talk about. It also demonstrates maybe a lack of we embrace in this country in the world for citations within academic journals, but comes 9th or 10th in the adoption innovation for healthcare. So I think we need to be wary of that where we're seeing some great stuff, but I don't know if we're seeing the change that we need to do. The reason for bringing Lord Bethel on today and is to try and embrace and work collaboratively. I feel that Jim and colleagues are seeing this, realising it. I think Jim was quite honest in his accountability that maybe what they could have done in the past, and I think we need to support and embrace that and be positive about that, which is great to see. We'll always have to combat the media and their assumptions. That's just made unfactually at a distance. So I don't see that being an issue that we should pay much attention to. And with it being Biomedical Science Day today, it's a real opportunity to showcase what diagnostics and testing can do. And that brings me to close the day. Unfortunately, we'll have my old friend David to come on and do that, but he is busy at the moment with everything that's going on, and we have done fit a lot into a small space of time. I want to pay a big thank you to everyone who's come and spoke today. Everyone who's logged in the conference, and to our sponsors, to Febric, to Randox, to Quidel, and to Roche. They've been prepared to speak openly about their kits, their testing, and some of these organisations have faced huge scrutiny and vitriol in some senses for what they're doing and what they've achieved, but they've come here to talk about that and collaborate and support us running this and being able to deliver it. So we do thank them and continue to champion their work. The recording and slides will be available from Monday. We will be hosting a number of other smaller bite-size events throughout the next few months. We will be hoping to get back to physical very soon. I'm not too sure about everybody else, but I'm a traditionalist and I like the opportunity to meet face to face in a social distance environment and talk. I do feel that online does sometimes pose problems depending where you are and the functionality. So we will be looking to do that, and that will probably start with our 4th annual conference, which will take place on December the 3rd. Where we'll bring everyone together, including Jim, David Wells, and hopefully Mr. Hancock, to talk about how we embrace this moving forward. But once again, thank you all for your time and support, and I look forward to speaking to you again in the future. Thank you very much.